morning, everyone. My name is István Kiss. I'm the Executive Director of the Danube Institute. It's my real privilege and pleasure to welcome you all here at this very timely and important event. We have a very distinguished list of speakers here. I would like to also separately say thank you and welcome Balázs Hankó, the Hungarian Minister for Culture and Innovation, and also His Excellency Edward Habsburg, who's our ambassador to the Vatican. It's a great privilege to have such distinguished speakers here with us today. But we also have other very distinguished speakers, several former members of parliament, ministers. It's really, I think, a very good roster of people and a great, we have a lot of people who have great expertise on this matter. I would also quickly like to thank the Youth Research Institute from MCC, who's our partner in this conference. They will have a separate panel. Thank you for partnering with us on this important event. We don't have a really lot of time, so I only want to say one very quick thing. I think there's basically two models in the world if we look at family policy. One is, I think, what I would describe as the Western European model, which says that we can't really do anything about low birth rates. People will not have more kids. We cannot do anything about it. And we also cannot really do anything about migration. People will just come. And basically, migration is good. So why don't we just have migration, and that will solve our demographics problems, and that's going to be a solution. Now, I think the past recent years have shown that this is a very bad approach to both migration and family policy, and I think it's changing a bit, but still, generally speaking, I think this is what most of the Western world has been doing in the past more than 10 years. Now, I think there's a separate approach in Eastern Asia, but they also kind of acknowledge that they can't really do anything about low birth rates, but they don't want migration either, so they started the process of automatizing their industries, using robotics to replace the workforce which is being lost. I think this is mostly South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and I think increasingly China as well. Now, I think there's a very separate third model which has been started by Hungary, where we refuse these two approaches. We said we can actually help our own people to have more babies. It's something which you can do, and we also don't need migration. So migration is, especially mass migration and illegal migration, is changing societies. It's not leading to better economic results. If anything, it's actually leading to chaos, potentially terrorism, and low economic growth. So we choose to help our own people, and actually, as we will see in some of these presentations, there are some very good results that Hungary can show on increasing the birth rates. We have doubled the number of marriages, abortions fell by half. So there's a lot of good potential in what Hungary has been doing. Now, luckily, some other governments have been trying to follow suit. I know Poland, during its previous governments, have been trying to do the same. We have a deputy minister who was responsible for this, so hopefully she will be able to tell us a bit about that. I'm much more skeptical about the current government there. And also I'm hoping that Trump will do something similar in America as well. I think during the presidential campaign you could hear some thoughts on this, so I'm very positive about that. And actually we will have, and that's also I'm very happy to announce that we will have the current charge d'affaires, Robert Palladino, give a keynote later on today. It's a great privilege that he will come and talk to us. He's really, what I noticed in talking with him briefly, he's a very significant improvement, sadly, to the previous ambassador. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Helen Roy, who was actually a mentee of us with the Budapest Fellowship Program. She's been instrumental in organizing this event, so I would like to give her the floor to make her introductory remarks. Thank you very much, and Helen, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Roy. Welcome to beautiful Budapest. It's an honor to be in the same room as so many of you here who are engaged in some of the most thoughtful, incisive work on the topics of family formation, law, justice, and human flourishing in the space. So I really do thank you for being here. When I envisioned this conference in the fall, I knew that bringing together this caliber of public intellectual in one room was going to be an ambitious sort of thing, if only because of all of the logistical effort that it took to get here. So I'm amazed, and I feel very blessed and thankful that it actually happened. And so let me just go ahead and say that the purpose of this conference is to address fundamental questions of human purpose and happiness. We're going to talk about policy, yes, but we're also going to be talking about metaphysics and justice and love. And I think the times demand such a return to first things. It isn't just countries, but also political parties themselves and political movements in this age of dramatic change, globalization, and global realignment, who have to answer the question, who are we? What or who are we for? And so, without further ado, I want to thank John and Melissa O'Sullivan, especially EWTN, MCC, Istvan, and all of the leadership at DI, and especially the people at DI who did the very detail-oriented work of just making the trains run on time, to include Valère, Loretta, Bense, all of you guys. I really am so indebted to you, and thank you so much for your time and work of organizing and putting this together. So I can think of no one actually more perfectly suited to kick this conference off than Ambassador Edward Habsburg, who I would like to introduce. Edward Habsburg Lothringen is 58 years old, married, and the father of 6 children. He is the ambassador of Hungary to the Holy See and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta since 2015. He has studied in Germany and in Switzerland, and he wrote his thesis on Thomistic philosophy. Before his current position, he worked in media and for years as the spokesman of Monsignor Klaus Kung, Bishop of St. Pölten. He has published several novels and books on history and family, and his latest books are Dubby the Doublehead Eagle, The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times, and most recently, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. He is passionately active on X and currently has more than 100,000 followers, and he speaks 7 languages: German, English, Italian, Hungarian, French, Spanish, and Latin. What an honor to have you here, and I cannot wait to hear your remarks on the family. We're all learning from you, so Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you very much, and what an honor to be here at the Danube Institute for this great conference on family and the future. I am going to speak today about how society can help and encourage families to become families, to have many children, and to be happy. And while doing this, I will be wearing 3 hats. You don't see them, but that's why I have to tell you about them. My first hat, of course, is Ambassador of Hungary to the Holy See, and in that I will speak about what Hungary is doing for families, and I'm not worthy to speak about it because the great specialist is sitting here in the first row. It's our minister. So Ambassador to the Holy See since 10 years. My second hat is I'm a family father, and yes, as Helen said, I have 6 children. I also have 2 grandchildren now. My next daughter is getting married, so family and a large family with many children has been my constant reality over the last 30 years. So as they say in script writing, and I was a script writer for a while, write what you know. And I can speak about family because I know how it is to have a large and, thank God, happy family. And as Helen mentioned, also, I have just published a book which is trying to encourage people to have large and happy families. It's a little how-to book, how to find the right spouse, when to get married, how many children to have, spoiler, many. And so these 3 hats will all influence what I'm going to talk about this morning. Who am I kidding? I have a fourth hat, and that's I'm a Habsburg. And when you're a Habsburg, you're almost by birth competent on the topic of family, because it's the family that represented family over 800 years in European history. And therefore, you will see that both of my books have a lot of Habsburg in it. And I'm going to also speak about Habsburg a little bit today. So thank you for having come this early in the morning. And I'm going to begin with a little outlook on the situation as we have it today. And when I arrived in Rome, driving in Rome is something very exciting, very different from here. Rules are suggestions. And in front of every red light, like an orchestra, everything changes. So I enjoyed very much driving around Rome, also without my driver. And one day, after 2 years or 2.5 years in Rome, I was driving and I was stopping at a zebra crossing, and I saw a pregnant woman crossing the zebra crossing. And I smiled and I said, wow, beautiful, a woman expecting a baby. And then I thought for a second, I realized that was the first time in 2.5 years that I had seen a pregnant woman in Rome. And then about 2 days later, I went to a little cinema in Rome that showed Fellini La Strada. I don't know whether you've seen this. It's a black and white movie from the 50s, one of the very early Fellini films. And it's semi-documentary cinema verite style. Anthony Quinn and Giulietta Massina, they're both circus artists, and they tour the countryside in Italy in the poor 50s. And they perform for the people in the villages. But the thing that shocked me in this film was when they performed, and Fellini just filmed those villages where they performed, there were children to the horizon. Everything was full of children. And if you go through Rome now, you don't see children. If you want to see children, you have to go to the zoo on Saturday. That's where they sort of drag them out of the houses, I think. But you never see children. And Italy was the country of bambini, and it's not anymore. And when Romans see me and my family, when they saw us walking through the streets, and we had 6 children, they were like, oh, this is so great. And I said, why don't you have such a large family? They said, no. It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. So I think that explains a lot. Is the idea it's not reasonable, we can't afford it, it's too expensive, and it's, yeah. So, in a way, I would say we live in a broken world, because think of the bambini from the 1950s, and then think of our world today. Things that were normal for millennia, I always like to say for the last 10,000 years, that our vocation is to have a family, to have many children, and to raise them in our values and pass them on, all of that, is suddenly gone since the 60s. And one experience, very strong experience, when I was freshly married, and we had our first baby, and my wife told me, while I was working, I never dared to even speak about my dream to have a family and children, because it was so much seen as something for a loser. If you just have a family and you're not successful in work, but you want to go for a family and have many children, which was her dream. It was her dream. She didn't dare to speak about it because there was such a strong pressure. You were terrified to stand out like a sore thumb in the modern world. And at the same time, a few weeks ago, I read a theater play by Euripides, The Children of Heracles. And there is a scene where one of the children is being sacrificed, a daughter. And she does this willingly to ask the gods to save her town. And she says, the only thing I regret is that I won't see the joys of marriage and having children. So, like 500 before Christ, everybody knew exactly what this was about. Now, it's like we have to relearn everything. we have to relearn and reteach a generation of people what it's all about. And so, in a way, we live in a broken world, as I said before. And then I had this very different experience when I went to the United States. I'm regularly in the States. I'm giving talks about Habsburgs, family, faith, and I went to a conference. And before the conference, there was a dinner. And when I talk about me having 6 children here in Europe, people always say, oh. If they're cynical, they say, don't you have a TV? And so I introduced myself to a young lady at a dinner saying, Edward Habsburg from Europe, I'm married, I have 6 children. And the reaction was not, it was a little bit of pity, because she had 8 children. And the next woman I greeted had 10 children. And they were young. And those were not rich people from economic, well-to-do background. These were normal families who had made the decision for a large family. And I spoke in front of many such families about family, and you feel very small in the States because something has begun there that still is a way to go in Europe. I feel that we're working on it, but this is still a long path for Europe to come back to fully embracing large families. But the United States lead the way in many things, and I experienced that when I went to the States. So before I speak about how to encourage families today, what society can do, and we will hear more about, as I told you, from our minister, Honko. I want to try to think about why should we encourage large families? Shouldn't we just lean into, the Southeast Asian solution of having more machines doing the work? We don't need many children. Or should we just lean into migration? Why should we encourage our people here to have lots of children if it is not reasonable, if it is expensive, if it is a life decision that will automatically close certain paths to you for the rest of your life, let alone allow you to sleep for several years. Why should we encourage large, wholesome families? Spoiler, because it's great. I can say that after 30 years. It's the greatest decision I ever did in my life. And it's the greatest gift on 3 levels. It's the greatest gift for the spouses to each other. It's incredible what having 6 children did to me and my wife and to our relationship with each other. It brought us closer together. It made both of us grow on a level that we couldn't imagine before. I always say it's like if I play the piano with 2 fingers and just on 1 octave. When you have a family, you learn that you have 10 fingers and that you have several octaves on both sides and the pedals to make the piano sound better. It's like this. You grow and your relationship gets better by having children. It's something that people can't imagine. Many people say, like, as soon as we have children, I can't be alone with my girl anymore. We can't have so much fun. You have no idea what you're talking about. It's the greatest thing in the world, and it brings out the best in you. So it's the greatest gift of the spouses to each other. It's the greatest gift that you can give to your children, is siblings. I can see that now with my children, when they are now in a WhatsApp group, communicating all over in different countries in Europe, 1 or 2 of them in the States, always interacting with each other and knowing that my siblings have my back, knowing that you're never alone, knowing that you have people who help you, who pray for you, who love you the way you are. This is the gift of giving your children siblings. And of course, it's the greatest gift that a couple can give to society. And that's also one of the reasons why Hungary encourages families to have children, is because if you grow up in a family of several children and not just alone, you learn all the virtues all the elements that will make you later on a responsible citizen, that will be compassionate to people who are weaker than you, that will look out for others, that will engage in the public space, that will take responsibility. All of this you learn, as Pope Francis once said, around the dinner table. When you sit around the table in 8, and of my 6 children, 5 are girls, so you can imagine how loud it was always around the table in the evening. You learn everything around the dinner table. For instance, the larger children, bigger children, are most definitely hungrier, but they always have to wait until the weaker, the younger ones, get their food first. You learn a lesson every day around the table about looking out for the weaker in society. You learn that you cannot speak about every topic without frightening your younger siblings. The younger siblings much rather learn their values from their elder siblings than from their parents. So, you learn everything about society, interaction, caring for each other around the dinner table. And that's why we should strongly encourage large families. And I know, of course, there are families who can't have children, disclaimer. I know this is a cross to carry for many. And I know there are families where parents have to raise their children single. It's a difficult way to go. But I'm saying in the ideal case, you have to work on having a large family and having father and mother both together. How to encourage, we'll learn more about that afterwards. Financial aid and incentives are very important. Very important. It's simply, if you know that the state has your back, if the state doesn't tell you, if you want to have a large family, that's your private hobby. See how you deal with it. Your problem. But if you know the state will do everything to make it more easy for you to survive as a large family, it makes a huge difference. Many people worldwide are impressed by Hungary's family program. It's one of the 2 topics that I most get asked about. Is it true that in Hungary you don't pay income tax after? How can I move to Hungary? The other one is our help for persecuted Christians. But this is one of the biggest topics. But I believe that it's not enough to give financial incentives because you need more of that. The second thing is that you need to spread a message in society that having a family and a large family is accepted. Not only accepted, but appreciated. Something great to do in our country. And if you look at this image here, you have a father, mother, and 2 children. If you land at the airport in Budapest, and many of you who landed here perhaps yesterday saw the posters, saw the stands coming in, Hungary, family-friendly country, and the latest one has 4 small children on one of the posters. So it's the only country that I know in Europe where you land at the airport, and the message is, this country welcomes children. This country welcomes you and appreciates if you decide to have many children. It's a message you never hear anywhere else in Europe. So financial aid and incentives, very helpful. Acceptance in society, important. It's important to have political leaders who have families. If you would think off your head how many European political leaders, prime ministers, presidents, etc., have families. In Hungary, we have political leaders who have families and who speak about having families. It's important. People look up to their political leaders. They still do. And if a political leader has a family, that will impress you. Just to give you an example, the new incoming ambassador of the United States to the Holy See, my new colleague, is called Brian Birch, and I think he has 8 children, I think. And I already had a conversation with his wife, my wife and me, with his wife over WhatsApp, and we spoke about family topics the whole time. It's a place where you immediately understand each other. And yes. And the 4th thing, and that's my very secret ingredients for the sauce, faith. Faith is very important. I know that the state cannot mandate faith, and you cannot make people believers. You cannot give people faith, but you will only make the step from 1.5 children to 2.5 to 4 or more if you're carried by faith. I believe that the Christian faith will be a core element. In fact, in my book, I say among the 5 criteria what spouse to choose. Faith is the first, not good looks, sexy and all that, but faith. Yes, and which brings me to the end of my talk. And to sum it all up, what I said now, you chose a very special date for this event. It's the 1st of April. I'm not talking about April Fool's Day. I'm talking about the day that Blessed Emperor Karl, Negyedik Károly, died. It was the day that the last Habsburg Emperor died, who had a large family, was a representative in political life that showed that he had a family, showed that he loved family, and was the representative, and is today still, worldwide, for many people, the exponent of having a large family built on Christian values. Today is the day that Blessed Emperor Karl died. It's not his feast day, because John Paul II decided to make his feast day the day of his wedding, which is beautiful as a symbol. But today is the day he died. So I think we can ask his intercession for this conference today. Thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy this wonderful event. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you so much, Ambassador, for your remarks. Next to speak, we're going to have Balázs Hanko, the Minister of Culture, Innovation here. He earned his degree in pharmacy from the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences at Semmelweis University of Medical Sciences. In 2005, he obtained a PhD with summa cum laude honors. He began his career as a resident pharmacist at the Institute of Pharmaceutical Organization at Semmelweis University, later becoming head pharmacist and eventually deputy rector for strategy and development. In addition to his administrative and organizational development work, he has over 2 decades of teaching experience and was awarded the title of university professor in 2023. From 2020 to 2022, he served as Deputy State Secretary for Higher Education at the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, and later at the Ministry of Culture and Innovation. Since December 2022, he has been the State Secretary responsible for higher education and innovation, and as of July 1st, 2024, he serves as the Minister for Culture and Innovation. He is married and a father of 4 children.
So, thank you for inviting me, and I will have one hat on my head as a minister, and I will try to cover my speech in that perspective. So, distinguished guests, in Hungary, 2010 was more than a change of government, which also marked family-friendly turn into governance. The post-communist liberal governments, in addition to treating families as an issue of low importance, saw family issue as a part of social policy with some support only for parents who were deemed to be in need. 2010 marked a turning point, the beginning of a work-based and a family-centered economic and social system, rather than an aid-based one. If there is work, there is everything. In Hungary today, anyone who wants a job can find one, and there are 1 million more people work than 15 years ago. We have achieved that parents do not live from their children, but truly live for their children. However, our objective is still to be achieved, so that those who have children are no worse of financial than those who did not raise children. The family-friendly, family-oriented Hungarian tax system is based precisely on recognizing the cost of raising children and the amount of public taxes to be paid. This is also expresses that the sole and the exclusive goal, our output, if you like, our family policy, is not just to have more children. This is very important, of course, to encourage young people to have children so that as many children as they plan to have can be born, and if possible, there to be planned for more than they planned before. But we also need to think about those who have already had 1, 2, or more children, and are no longer planning to have more, for example, due to their age. But they also rely on the state to help with child care costs. So as far as family policy is concerned, not only the child that is planned to be born is a value, but the child that is already born as well. In our country, before 2010, only the devaluation and the marginalization of family values described above was typical. But in Western Europe and America, much more dangerous processes have started and are still growing. In the name of some extreme, distorted form of freedom, questioning of traditional family values such as marriage and childbearing, the relativization of gender roles, and even gender identity according to gender ideology. The violent sensitization towards same-sex relationship based on the lobby activity of LGBTQ groups. Some extreme climate protection activist groups do not even hesitate to define having children as an enemy of the preservation of life on Earth. The previous Democrat US administration, and unfortunately, the bureaucratic waterhead in Brussels, are also doing their utmost to force us renitent Hungarians to accept these theses. One might say deviation which go against common sense and the experience of everyday life. It was not so long ago when the American ambassador marched in the front row of the Pride with a rainbow flag in his hand. America is now, thanks to President Trump, taking huge steps to return to normality. Unfortunately, however, Brussels is still not listening to the voice of the times, and the same old record is still being spun. Here is the latest scandalous case when the EU court in Luxembourg said in the case of an Iranian migrant that it wanted to force us Hungarians to accept that if a woman identifies herself as a man or a man as a woman, should be obliged to accept this on the basis of the simple medical or psychological certificate. This really goes against all common sense, and moreover Brussels, as it did with migration, want to deprive us Hungarians and of course all the other member states of the right to decide with whom we want to live and how we want to live, who we want to accept and who we don't want, and what we recognize and what we do not. We will not tolerate this intrusive interference into our national affairs, just as we had not tolerated it before. Not Brussels or Luxembourg will tell us Hungarians who we want to live. This is the reason why traditional family values, which in the past have been subject of a transnational consensus for centuries, must now be included and declared in our fundamental law. Otherwise, we cannot prevent these attempts to influence us. We know that Brussels also has numerous allies and paid agents in our homeland who would be happy to put these ideologies into practice for a good sum of money, if they could. It is a safeguard against these attempts that our fundamental law and its current amendment declare the following fundamental truth of existence. Marriage is a community of life between one man and one woman. Second, family is the basis for the survival of our nation. Third, family relationship is based on marriage and the parent-child relationship. Fourth, human being is either a man or a woman. The father is male and the mother is female. So instead of migration and rainbow gender ideology, we continue to believe in family, marriage, and child-centered approach, and in the order of creation. And the time will prove us right in this regard too. Just it turned out that the Hungarians were right, and the Hungarians are right on the issue of migration and of war. In 2023, the European Union as a whole had 15 percentage points fewer childbirths than 10 years earlier, means 600,000 fewer children born. While in Hungary, the birth rate had fallen by only 2 percentage points over the same period of time. It is no coincidence that despite the declining number of children, deaths in the EU have consistently exceeded births by more than 1 million in recent years, a fall of 6.5 million in 10 years, signaling the onset of a demographic winter in Europe. Despite this, EU's population as a whole has not declined but has increased by almost 8 million. However, this is due to the mass immigration, with 14 million third-country migrants arriving in the EU over the indicated period. Of course, immigration can make up for the population loss for a while, but does not solve the sustainability problems either. Hungary's family-friendly policies have helped it to move up from last place in 2010 to the third place in terms of fertility rate, even exceeding the EU average. Only Bulgaria and France are ahead of us. But in France, the high proportion of birth from immigrant background, over a quarter, explains the higher fertility rate, while in Bulgaria, the high proportion of the expatriate population modifying these statistics. So our achievements are therefore commendable in international terms. But the truth is that we could be doing much better if we were not burdened by the determinations inherited from the past. Between 2010 and 2024, the number of women of childbearing age decreased by 23 percentage points. It means 330,000 women. The fact that the birth rate did not fall as drastically during this period, only by about 13 percentage points, was due to the fact that the fertility rate increased by 21%, which counterbalanced the effect of the decline in the population. The reason for this was the anti-family policies of the previous left-wing governments. Think of the 1995 Bokros package or the past 2002 authoristic measures, which reduced the numbers of births so the fewer women are now entering childbearing age from the fewer children born then. To illustrate this, if the number of women of childbearing age had remained stable after 2010, we had more than 200,000 more children would have been born by now. The shadow of the past sins and omissions is long, and unfortunately, we are paying the price now. So we need to double our efforts to counteract their impact. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great success that in this year, 2025, we will be spending 4 times as much family support as in 2010. But if the economic and budgetary margins allow, we must increase this even further. That is why we announced the new family tax reduction program in February, under which we will double the family tax allowance in 2 steps, starting in July this year and ending on 1st of January next year. We are also extending the personal income tax exemption for mothers, in addition to those with 4 or more children who are already tax exempt, from October those with 3 children, and then in 4 steps based on age starting from January 2026, until 2029. Those with 2 children will not pay income tax for the rest of their lives. The existing tax exemption for mothers under 30 will also be extended next year, and the infant care benefit and the child care benefit will be also exempt from income tax from July this year, which means 500,000 mothers without income tax next year, 1 million mothers without income tax 2029. But there are also a number of other family-friendly programs that are being launched. I could mention Workers' Loan Scheme, Rural Home Renovation Program, or Housing Capital Program, etc., etc., etc. We have more than 30 measures in our family policies. Ladies and gentlemen, we have not yet lost our common sense, and we have faith in God. We do not compromise on the importance of family relationships and the order of creation. We Hungarians are battle-hardened nations. Resistance to oppression and communism is in our genes, whether it blows in from the east or the west. And we will not allow our national culture and family ties to be broken, and we will not allow the bonds that are most sacred to us to be broken. We have the right to our national sovereignty. 2018 was the year of families once before, and this year will be the year of families again, because we are Hungarians, we are Christians, we are with families and without gender ideology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Y'all are going to be seeing a lot of me today. So next I'd like to introduce Georgina Kish-Kozma, who is the head of research at the Youth Research Institute. Dr. Kish-Kozma's research interests include youth studies, family policy, and nationalism. Since joining the Center for Sociology at MCC, that's the Matthias Cornelius Collegium, she has been dedicated to advancing the understanding of the mindset and lifestyle of the younger generation. So she's going to be introducing some speakers and giving some remarks. And here we go. The conference is starting. Our first roundtable.
So, I would like to welcome everyone. It is a great pleasure to present to you today at this very important conference the latest research results of the Youth Research Institute, so that can we then discuss this topic in more detail among distinguished guests. As you can see, the title of my presentation is Carry the Fire, or Why Do We Need Children? It is a fair question why I choose this title, because having children is a part of life when we grow up. It gives meaning and purpose to our lives. So why do we need children? We need them as a society because if we don't have enough children, sooner or later nations will face very difficult economic challenges and unprecedented crises. In some tragic cases, we may even fear the extinction of entire cultures. If you follow the case of South Korea, for example, you will realize that so few children are born then every year that according to some demographers, if this trend doesn't change, South Korea could be the first culture to collapse. And not because of a pandemic or not because of a war, but because of the most pressing crisis of modern times, the childlessness. As a family, we also need children because who wants to rely on robots in old age instead of the vitality of grandchildren? And we need children as a human being, as men and women, because raising children could be the most important goal in our everyday lives. The latter is particularly important as young people increasingly suffer from uncertainty and unpredictable future. As many others have said before me, we are living in turbulent times, and we are living in the decades of crisis. Successive crises such as economic crisis, migration crisis, pandemic, and wars are just the ones that threaten our physical existence. But what we are talking about here today is a real threat to the civilization itself. It is a crisis of the institution of traditional family. While a war or a pandemic can inflict serious and often difficult to heal wounds on the bodies of nations, while families and communities are strong enough, those nations will eventually recover. However, if the foundation of the society, the institution of family is in crisis, then our civilization itself is in danger, and it is questionable whether we will survive this wound or not. The demographic crisis is exacerbated by the fact that many people still refuse to admit that there is a crisis. We know that not everyone agrees that strong families create strong communities and strong communities create strong nations. There is a general consensus among the global elite that the institution of family is in many ways outdated and unnecessary. And it is also worrying that several international research groups are working on the development of the biobag, the artificial womb technology, which can be used to develop babies outside of the bodies and sometimes making natural pregnancy unnecessary. So we can see that there is a lot to do because all of these profound and rapid changes affect young people in particular, and young people will determine the society of the future. And these turbulent times, the willingness to have children also generally decline. Young people tend to postpone starting a family, which leads to fewer children being born. So the main goal of the Youth Research Institute to understand young people and the world in which young people are socialized, because we can be absolutely sure that we are not able to develop an effective family policy without understanding young people. It is therefore a crucial job or a crucial task to find out what young people are thinking about their future and family formation plans. Yes. So my presentation is also based on the result of our latest research. Our aim was to compare the future and family formation plans of young people living in the United States and in Hungary. In the United States, our collection partner was the Signal. So the survey was conducted by the Youth Research Institute between December 2024 and January 2025 among Hungarian and American citizens between the ages of 15 and 39 on a nationwide representative sample of 1,000 respondents. The demographic situation in Europe has long been unfavorable. One of the most important factors behind the population decline is the decreasing willingness to have children, which is due to the rapid change in fertility behavior. The most important factors influencing the fertility behavior are the postponement of childbearing and changes in marital status. Although we can observe that there are more and more forms in cohabitation, but starting a family traditionally begins with marriage. Several studies have shown that married people are more satisfied with their relationship status than those who live with their partners. So according to our research, young people in Hungary and in the United States would like to get married at some point in their future. And the following figure also shows that the vast majority of the respondents has a desire for lifelong commitment and consider marriage as the most ideal form of commitment. But in this age group, having children is often postponed, and more young people are only starting a family in their early 30s. In Hungary, women between the ages of 20 and 24, who used to be the most fertile age group, had more than 2/3 fewer children between 1990 and 2009. They were replaced by women in the second half of their 20s and early 30s. This cultural shift happened very quickly and in a relatively short period of time. The result was a sharp decline and then stagnation in fertility and birth rates. And the lost births were not replaced at all in the 1990s, which is a huge problem now. The average age of women at the birth of their first children has risen from 23 to over 30, which means that women are now starting to have children in an age when they were almost finished 3 decades ago. So in our country and in the United States, young people have similar views on the age between 22 and 25 as the lower age limit for responsible decision to have children. But while in Hungary, young people believe that the upper age limit is around 40%, in the United States, young people believe that a responsible decision can be made even after the age of 45. However, postponing childbearing increases the likelihood that not all planned children can be born at the end of the day. So it is no coincidence that young Hungarians and Americans believe that the ideal number of children is more than 2, but they raise fewer than 1. But the question arises as to why they plan to have fewer children they consider ideal, and why the number of children they plan to have is fewer than the number of children they plan number of children they wish to have. Young people's ideas for starting a family is also determined by what they think about an ideal family. And however, the data shows an increase in cohabitation and a weakening of the institution of marriage with more divorce, later marriages, and trends celebrating single lifestyle, flooding social media. According to the respondents, the family considered by young people is the traditional family. So, according to our respondents, in an ideal family, both mother and father are present, the children's biological parents live together and raise their children, mother and father are married, and parents have their first children at a relatively young age, and grandparents are actively involved in raising the children. Women nowadays are present in the labor market, so it is not surprising that young people think it is ideal that if parents have equal share in child-raising responsibilities. However, we also see that the modern liberal ideologies have a strong impact on young people's ideas for starting a family. We see this in the following figure, where both climate ideology and the intentional childlessness are extremely widespread, especially among young people living in the United States. Almost 1 in 2 young people in the United States believe that childlessness is a conscious decision, and a third also think that it is important not to have too many children to save the planet. However, nowadays we know that to solve the climate changes, we need more advanced technologies, and we need more talented people to develop these innovations. So to sum up, on the one hand, according our research and according the data, we can see that young people in Hungary and in the United States seem to believe in the concept of the traditional family formation, as they would like to get married at some point of their lives, and they consider it is important to have children. On the other hand, we can also observe, according to the trends of the last few decades, that young people usually postpone starting a family, which increases the likelihood that not all desired children can be born by the end of the day. So it is extremely important to examine why young people's plans to start a family are not realized, and if it is important to them to start a family, the question arises as to what the main barriers are. And according to our presentation, we can see that one of these obstacles could be that the modern liberal ideologies have a strong impact on young people's family formation plans. But recognizing this historical challenge, the Hungarian government decided to build an innovative, comprehensive family support system and put families with children at the center of its future policy vision. As a result, family policy and the promotion of starting a family and raising children have been given particular emphasis in Hungary since 2010, and the Hungarian government has developed a rather complex family policy package, which includes a number of concrete measures. But these topics will be discussed in more detail by our invited guest in the following panel discussion. I would like to ask our distinguished guests to come to the stage. Emma Waters, Johanna Fröhlich, Gergely Réti, and Dr. Levente Székely, the director of the Youth Research Institute, who moderates discussion. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and for more information, please check our website. Thank you very much.
So welcome everyone. Good morning. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's panel discussion organized by the Youth Research Institute. We are gathered here today to discuss one of the most pressing yet often underestimated challenges of our time, demographic decline. What do we need to know about this issue? Aside from what was outlined in my colleague's presentation, according to the United Nations 2024 World Population Prospects, more than half of the world's countries are now below the replacement fertility level, and women worldwide are having one fewer child on average that they did in 1990. Across not only Europe, but most of the world, birth rates have fallen to historically low levels, leading to significant economic, social, and political consequences. But why is this happening? Is it simply an economic issue, rising living costs, housing crisis, and job insecurity? Or do deeper cultural and ideological factors such as shifting family values, career prioritization, and social attitudes toward marriage and parenthood play an even greater role? These are complex, highly relevant questions. And today, we are fortunate to have a panel of experts who will help us explore the causes and the consequences of demographic winter, as well as potential solutions. We have Emma Waters, policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, focusing on family policy, biotechnology, and reproductive trends. We have Johanna Fröhlich, Senior Research Fellow at the Research Institute for Politics and Government at Ludovika University for Public Services. And last but not least, we have Gergely Réti, Collegium Commissioner at Matthias Corvinus Collegium, offering deep insights into European social and political challenges. As we have all heard in Dr. Georgina Kiskosma presentation, the family formation issues we are discussing today are not just theoretical, they are very real and similar for both Hungary and the United States. However, despite the similarities in trends, such as declining birth rates and shifting family structures, these two countries are fundamentally different in terms of their historical, cultural, and social approaches to population and family life. Given these differences, but also the major parallels in demographic decline, can we say that we are facing a global mainstream phenomenon that goes beyond national policies? Should we start thinking about this as a civilizational challenge rather than just a national one? This question goes for everyone. I think we should start with Emma, please.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone here in this incredible conference that's already been so inspiring to me. My daughter Cordelia is only 3 months old, but she's also a very big fan of everything that we're talking about here. She keeps saying more babies for some reason. I don't know where that's coming from. But when it comes to this conversation on declining birth rates, I think that it goes without saying in this room that this is certainly a civilizational crisis that we're facing. That what we're talking about here is not a temporary decline in birth rates in a few countries, but is a long-term decline that we're seeing across the developed world, from the United States to Hungary to Spain to Japan, on down the list. And so it is impossible to underscore the gravity of the situation, given that this is not something that's affecting one particular culture or context, but seems to be something that is global in its impact and effect. And so I think the necessity to think about this not only within our particular context, but also in the driving global trends that seem to be encouraging this outcome is of absolute importance. And while I think for those in the room, this is old hat, everyone's very familiar with the decline in birth rates, I think there are still many who are just starting to recognize that this problem is not going away. So there was a rather funny article in the United States just a few days ago where many Republican lawmakers were like, oh, declining birth rates? This is a really big problem. And everyone's like, yes, it is. You guys are on the right track. But I think recognizing that that's where the general public is, right? Even the more informed general public is just now starting to engage in these conversations in a very intelligent way, which is exciting because there's a lot that we can build on from here.
Well, yes, thank you very much. I think what is interesting to realize and acknowledge that this is really a global phenomenon and an international phenomenon is that also in Hungary, even our grandparents' generation had already not had that many children, right? It's something that I usually think about because I have spent the last couple of years in Latin America, where we surely had this idea of having a lot of children, big families, which is I wouldn't say mainly true, because it's also changing, as you said. Even those societies that we about which we have this idea of having big families and many children and many generations living together. Even those societies are changing in these decades. But there, at least a generation back, 2 generations back, there were still these big families. And in Hungary, I think we have always been struggling with this idea of survival. It's not new to us, right? It's like, of course, decreasing population, yeah. We know that long ago. And I think it's very interesting to go in the depth of why is it so. Of course, we are a small nation. Of course, we have had a turbulent history. Geographically, we are in a spot where it would have been, I guess, very hard to avoid those turbulences. All these are somehow impacted our vision and our ideals, and even the good-making characteristics of marriage and motherhood. But I think that that's a good opportunity to reflect on the deeper reasons why this could be so.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. It's a pleasure for being here, and I just would like to add one thought that as I can see, if we are thinking of the demographic issues, it can be seen only as a national issue, because it has so many aspects and effects. For example, according to the pension system, or it has economical aspects as well. And I think that in the European Union, it's also an issue of competitiveness too. So I totally agree with that this is a global and civilizational question.
So thank you. I think that raising awareness among younger generation about demographic decline is very important. However, awareness alone may not be enough. Policy decisions and cultural attitudes play an equally important role in shaping the future of family life and fertility rates. Emma, in the United States, the recent change in administration has the potential to bring not only new policies but also cultural transformation. Do you believe the US is facing a family policy and cultural shift? Could this lead to renewed focus on family values, pro-natalist policies, and broader rethinking of demographic challenges?
Yes, this is a fantastic question. I mean, I think in the context of the United States, it's been so encouraging these past couple of months since President Trump has taken office to see the very natural emphasis on the family. So not only have multiple executive orders actually discussed declining birth rates and the need to help families have the children that they desire, but we have Vice President J.D. Vance, who has spoken of the goodness of children, the value of children, his appreciation for families, sort of setting the national tone that we are not only pro-child, but we're pro-family, and from the highest levels of our government want to support and encourage family formation. And even just on the very practical level, seeing J.D. Vance with his family at the inauguration was so encouraging, and like little hands and kids reaching out to parents in the middle of what is probably one of the, or what is the greatest career moment of his life. He brought his children, children who can't be controlled, children who were going to try to mess up their mother's hair in front of hundreds of photographers and those in the media, or even seeing J.D. Vance traveling around the world with his children in pajamas, right? I think those, as a mother, are some of the most relatable things that, even beyond the official remarks that have been made by this administration, just seeing children in a very practical, day-to-day way included at at the national level. It's probably one of the things that I think culturally will have the longest impact on the way we think about children, because certainly how we talk about children and the messaging angle, I think, is so important here. So in the United States, and particularly the work that I do with the Heritage Foundation, we have gravitated towards the language of pro-family policies, sort of instead of the pronatalist category. Not that pronatalism is a simple description, works very well, but when it comes to the actual goals that we have in mind, we are very bullish on the point that we're not merely advocating more children, but we're advocating more married families that can have the children that they desire. Because ultimately, long before the birth crisis that the United States is experiencing and that we're experiencing globally, we saw a marked recession in marriage. And it was the marriage recession that came long before the birth-dearth crisis, with no-fault divorce, increases in single parenthood, a general sexual revolution that really redefined our family structures in the United States. And so before we even begin talking about more children, I think one of the most important things for this administration and for our work in national politics is to really emphasize and enable marriage as a big priority. So we're certainly seeing, especially among the younger Generation Z, there seems to be a renaissance in cultural appreciation for the family, particularly among young men who I think are starting to be very vocal in their desire to return to more traditional values of marriage, of having children, of finding a good job where they can support their family. And this is certainly happening online in the sort of like Twitter debates that we're seeing. But I think we're starting to see the downstream effects of that too, which is incredibly encouraging. And so between the national discussions and just natural inclusion of children, it's mirroring a very organic response among the younger generation. For my husband and I, we're both in Gen Z. We have 2 children, and we're no longer an anomaly, which is so encouraging. We have many sets of friends who live even on Capitol Hill who have multiple children and are really just thinking, what are the practical ways that we can do the work that we love and have the children that we desire and build a good life together. And the final thing I'll say on this is when it comes to the messaging and the policies that are in place, there's no silver bullet solution to declining birth rates. It will require every aspect, from the financial incentives to the more indirect approaches that just empower families with the freedom and flexibility that they need to structure their life well, whether that's charter schools or homeschooling or more creative options for education and so on. But with the messaging angle, I think it is so important to focus on not necessarily the outcome that we desire, which is like to help families have the children that they want, but on sort of the first principles that Helen discussed. Because one of the things that we've seen in other countries and that we've started to see in the United States is that when you make the conversation all about having children, you end up getting a very negative response messaging-wise. So there was a very telling article in the Washington Post last year where a woman basically said, okay, fine, I'll grant you declining birth rates are occurring and I can see where this is a big problem, but why is it my problem? Like, why is it my job to have more kids for you just because you want to increase your GDP or you want to encourage national security outcomes or all of the list of issues we recognize? Why is that my problem personally? And she basically was like, if it's a problem you recognize, you figure it out. I don't want to be part of this. And I think we run the risk, if we focus on having children too specifically, of actually alienating a large swath of the population who may not have the sort of religious and cultural inclinations to agree. And so I think focusing on the underlying causes of like the fact that happy and hopeful people have children. And if you see a nation of people who aren't having kids, then what does that say about our emotional and spiritual well-being? Well, first and foremost, then we need to address that. And we need to help, we need to look at those root causes of creating an environment where children are seen as a blessing and really desired. And that, of course, begins with top line as well as like cultural bottom-up work.
Thank you. As a father of 4, I think that I know how fathers feel. But how about the mothers? Johanna, in Western societies, motherhood is increasingly treated as a personal choice, detached from public responsibility. From your perspective, what are the risks of treating motherhood as a purely private matter without political or legal recognition of its social value?
Thank you very much. Right, so I would like to stress out that I think that we here can also not escape the choice, the merely choice problem, I would say. So I think that here too we are part of this global and societal challenge in which these kind of life shaping decisions are seen merely as a choice. And it's not a problem that it's a choice. It is a choice because one has to welcome or see the blessing and the grace in welcoming a child. And that has to be a choice made by the father and the mother in a marriage, a big yes. And I don't think that's a problem. The problem is that if that is reduced to a choice, because the choice-oriented or the autonomy-oriented vision in law or in political science, how we see rights, how we see individual rights, how we define and understand what does that mean if I have a right as a mother, if I have a right as a children. So I think that those are concepts that here too work as a paradigm. So in Hungary too, we understand, we connect to that kind of paradigm where individual rights are seen as made by an individual person, not necessarily being in a relationship, I mean philosophically not having this relationality in which this choice is made, or in which a right is being exercised, or in which a right is being essentially connected to a responsibility to fulfill a duty, right? So I would say that there is this problem about legal and political philosophy about how we understand and define rights, legal obligation, and how that is connected to choice on the one hand, but also on the other hand, on a very objective duty that mothers, fathers, family members, and even on a higher level, society, a community faces when there are families around, when there are children around. Also, I would say that this relationality that motherhood, fatherhood, parenthood involves, where there are kids, this involves fragility, right? Dependence. It is also to acknowledge that I am not I'm not fully the master of the duties that I have to do, or the situations in which I have to stand and fulfill my duty, not in a way, and that's, I guess, also a big issue and big challenge that we can talk about later, that this is not or should not be an imposed duty, an obligation that you must do, but an obligation in which you realize the grace, the blessing that you can have through fulfilling those obligations and duties, and in which you contribute to the happiness of your family, to your own flourishing. And that's also, I'm sure you received this question because we have a project on flourishing mothers in the University of Public Service. So we try to look into the question of what are those basic good-making characteristics of motherhood and parenthood for which people could and ideally would choose to be mothers, and that is not necessarily reduced to a private sphere. And I would even deny that private and public would go so separately in this case. I would say this is just organically the same, right? When mothers, parents, fathers are taking care of their children, they perform their duties to take care of them. It is something that has various aspects at the same time. The very same act of caring has impact, obviously, on the child, on the grandparent for whom we are caring, but also at the same time we are shaping and nurturing a human life, a citizen, a responsible citizen, freely thinking and creative, beautiful, exceptional being. So those are all things that have impact on the society on a larger level.
For me, the key word was organic. So there is no doubt that shifts in government and policy can have a profound impact on cultural and demographic trends. In the United States, family policy is often shaped by changing administrations at the state level, but in Hungary, over the past 15 years, we have seen a consistent and widespread commitment to supporting young people in starting families. Despite these efforts, many young Hungarians still face challenges when it comes to settling down and having children. Gergő, from your perspective, what are the biggest obstacles Hungarian youth face today when considering family formation? Is it true that dating and finding the right partner has never been as complicated as it is nowadays?
Thank you very much for this question. I would like to start there that in 2020 there was a large sample survey on youth. The youngsters, when I speak about young people, I am speaking about the age between 15 and 29 years old young people. So they were asked that what are the biggest challenges they have to face with. And they answered, in the first three answers were instability, for example, insecurity, and also the weakened communities. And I think this is a big challenge nowadays, that the communities of the young people, they are weakened, because this can be the place of socialization, this can be the place where they find their partners, and also according to a lot of issues, for example the pandemic, the COVID-19, that the mental health of the young people, it's also in that survey, is not in a good condition, it's in a bad shape. So first of all, I think that we have to strengthen these communities. But answering to your question, I think that is true that it is not that easy to find a partner nowadays because of the digital world, and also because of that micro communities, for example, on the countryside here in Hungary, they are not that strong. And also, I would like to add one more thing, that I think communication to the young people about families, about the values of family life is sometimes not an easy task, because if I just look around in my communities, for example, my friends, there are a lot of families who are not functioning well. So we had to find the good examples, and we have to give these examples to the young people.
Thank you. Hungary has taken a more proactive approach by introducing various pro-natalist policies over the past decade. These policies include financial incentives, tax breaks for families, extended parental leave, and housing support programs, all designed to make family life more economically feasible and attractive. Yet, despite these efforts, fertility rates in Hungary and across Europe remain below the replacement level, leading some to question whether such policies are enough. Gergő, are these pronatalist measures truly effective, or do they fail to address the deeper cultural and social shifts that have led to declining birth rates? Are financial incentives alone sufficient, or must governments also work to reshape cultural attitudes toward family and childbearing? How can we further help and support young people?
Yeah, so I think that family policy is not the policy for the fast results, but it is visible here in Hungary. The fundamental law of Hungary, which was accepted in 2011, claims that so the basis of the Hungarian society are the families. And we have to protect these families. In that time, I mean in 2011, the fertility rate in Hungary was the lowest in the European Union. Now we can see that it is getting better and better. So there are visible results, I think. There are a lot of measures which was made by the Hungarian government, which put in the policy, I mean in the middle of its policy, the family policy. For example, youngsters, young people under 25, they do not have to pay personal income tax. The women under 30 who have children, they also do not have to pay this personal income tax. Also, there is baby loan, which is after, if within 5 years a child is born, it will be interest-free. So there are a lot of different measures, and it is a system. And I think if it is consequent, not just now, but in the next decades, the results will be more visible. But we can see the results now as well.
Okay, thank you. I think the consequent measures are the most important thing in this case. Johanna, many pronatalist policies, such as those in Hungary, have been accused of objectifying women or reducing them to birthing machines. How can pronatalist policies support and uplift motherhood without falling into the trap of forcing women into specific roles?
Thank you. Well, I think that it is indeed a challenge and a risk to reduce the issue of parenthood and motherhood to simply its biological aspects, right? It would be a great mistake to think that, or to see motherhood and parenthood only as a biological issue. And therefore, I would also say that another risk would also be to merely concentrate on motherhood, parenthood as an economic or issue of family policy or economic policy. All of these are obviously very important aspects. One would be very hard spot to deny that the physical bond between a mother and the child and the father is essential, especially in the first years. There are all these debates about maternal leave and how long that should last, etc. But also merely, again, monetizing family policies and motherhood, parenthood is also leaving out some very important elements of the picture that I think could be constructive or could be useful not to leave out. As I referred to it in my previous answer, I think that this relational matter or the relational aspect of motherhood and parenthood is something that has to be taken into consideration and bring all that complexity somehow. Of course, it's impossible to bring all that complexity to the level of public policy, and for those who are shaping those policies, have kind of an impossible job in this respect. But at least it's good to know, and it's good to be conscious about how many different aspects are playing and are on the table. So there is a great example for this. There is a model law for care that has been under discussion in the Organization of American States. And that model law for care has, for example, exactly the same individual and merely autonomy-oriented approach to the human person, to mothers, to caretakers that I was talking about before. And so following that idea and taking that idea to the not even to the extreme, but just to follow it consequently, would mean that those who take care of others would always take care of them because of their free choice. And of course, we are free persons, we are free, we are also autonomous persons who make choices. But there is just life around us, objectively. People are in need, persons outside the womb and within the womb, that are in need. So there are those duties that we have to fulfill to answer those needs. But again, back to this model law. So if we apply merely this autonomy-oriented approach, then caretaking is always and a must, that it's a free is voluntary. So there are no obligations to care without this voluntary basis. And so therefore, it is also a work, right? It is a job that you undertake, just any other jobs that you undertake. And then if it's a job, then you have to be paid for it. And if you have to be paid for it, then you have to be equally paid for it, just as any other job on the job market. So isn't this a great reduction of what parents are doing, or parents supposed to be doing? And I wouldn't deny for a second that monetary help, economic help is obviously essential and important, but it's certainly not the first reason why a parent wants to become a parent. It's not the sense of the yes that mothers and fathers say when they are welcoming a child. So I think we have to dig deeper here.
Thank you. Thank you. So during our discussion, we have examined the economic and policy-related aspects of demographic decline. However, beyond financial incentives and state support, cultural and ideological factors also play a crucial role in shaping attitudes toward marriage, family, and childbearing. In recent years, movements such as the DINK movement, double income, no kids, have gained traction, particularly among young professionals who prioritize financial stability, career advancement, and personal freedom over traditional family life. Some argue that this growing emphasis on careers, radical feminism, and the individual is a main driver of declining birth rates. It encourages young people, especially women, to delay or abandon traditional family formation. Others, however, believe that this view is too simplistic and that economic pressure, housing shortages, and social insecurity play a far greater role. Emma, in this cultural movement, just a symptom of a broader economic and social changes, or is it actively discouraging family formation? Do you think these trends can be reversed, or are they a lasting transformation in how younger generations approach family life?
It's a fantastic question. I would say yes and more. So there are certainly economic factors that are here and at play when it comes to people's ability to afford children. And my colleagues here have done immense amounts of work in that space. But the one thing that I always think of when people chalk it up to simply being an economic barrier is that first, even in self-reported studies across the United States, economic or financial factors are never the number one reason that women cite or young people cite for not having children. It may be the second, it may be the third, but it's never the primary thing. And then second, when it comes to the economic incentives, on a very practical note, my generation is horrible with money. They're one of the most financially irresponsible generations we've seen in forever. The fact that they're actually sitting down and calculating, well, I don't think we can afford children because if we look at our savings versus this versus the payment, they barely have a budget. Like, I'm not actually convinced that it's the financial that's keeping people from having children because ultimately they're spending their money where they, in accordance with what they value, right? And they're not afraid to invest or to set aside money for those things. And so ultimately, it's a question of what they value, not necessarily their own understanding of their financial situation or their abilities. And I think in many cases, like I rarely see a married couple with children who doesn't receive, through various capacities, the assistance they need. Does it mean that they necessarily have everything that they want or there's not difficulty? No. Certainly there are many very difficult situations. But at the same time, I think that I don't think the financial or the economic is the driving concern that we need to consider. I think when it comes to the cultural impact, though, and the longstanding discussion that we've had around marriage and children, I think that's where we actually see some of the most detrimental effects that have occurred. And so there's 2 points here that I want to make. Yes. So first, when I moved to Washington, D.C. about 4 years ago, this was right after President Biden was elected. Everyone was sort of like trying to recover from what had been the first 4 years of the Trump admin, and then looking ahead to another hopeful election, which we're currently in now. And so the very edgy thing to say among young staffers and policy workers was that we believe that policy shapes culture. And this was very edgy, and so everyone was like, no, policy doesn't shape culture, this shapes culture. And we were like, no, guys, we've really got this one. Better policies is the answer. And of course, the policy analysts would say that better policies is the answer. However, in recent years, I think a more nuanced understanding of this discussion has just sort of revealed itself to many people, which is that ultimately it's our technology that shapes culture. For better or for worse. Technology is mediating and transforming every aspect of our life, and it always has. Whether it was the creation of the wheel or the printing press or the iPhone, technology has always been the thing that actually transforms the way that we see the world, that we interact with one another, and really our ability to interact with one another. And that has had very negative impacts on our culture. But it's also, I think, opening the doors to many incredible opportunities that we can capitalize on and really make the most of in this moment. So we don't need to simply be Luddites and say everyone should reject technology, become a trad wife, move to a farm, have your children, which is great. We have friends who are doing it, and I think it's super awesome for them. But it's not what everyone needs to do, right? And so this comes to the second point. So when we think about the technologies and the subsequent cultural messages that have emanated from them, we first look at the 20th century and what were some of the most profound technologies that were developed and applied on the wide scale. The first was abortion and the normalization that one could unnaturally end pregnancy through the use of certain tools. The second was the use of hormonal birth control applied to on a large scale, right? Again, this technology, this innovation that's allowed us to sort of redefine our relationship with marriage, with sex, and with children. And then a whole host of other developments from reproductive technologies on down. And so when we think about this issue, those are three technological innovations that I think have either directly harmed or certainly subverted our relationship with marriage, sex, and children. But then I look to where we are now, and I think in many cases, those technologies, as well as digital technologies and other things from pornography on down, have have reinforced this alienation from our bodies, that we are no longer thinking, there's a profound alienation that has occurred, where the cultural message, the medical message has been that your body is somehow other than you, right? That I am a person and my body is this thing that I am attached to, rather than understanding the body, the spirit, the mind is this unified whole, right? That I am my body in a very real sense, that there's no self apart from its physical embodiment. And that's incredibly important when it talks about motherhood, right? And this natural ability to have children on down. And so what that's led to is one, when we've relied on sort of one-size-fits-all solutions to thinking about our bodies and thinking about fertility, from transgenderism to address deeper mental crises, to a strict reliance on certain technologies to address infertility, the result is that rather than reintroducing people to a deeper understanding of their bodies and the way we interact with the world and with one another and with children, we've actually just further solidified that alienation. And so very practically, a lot of the work that I do is on infertility and restorative reproductive medicine. And one of the things that I think is so important here is that when we're talking about declining birth rates, that's going hand in hand with declining fertility rates or subfertility across the world and in the United States. So not only are people maybe no longer interested in having children, but in many cases they're just biologically unable or finding it far more difficult than they ever had to have children. And that's a very precise problem that we can actually address through very precise responses. And so looking at the birth crisis through the lens of encouraging and restoring infertility and reproductive health conditions, I think is so important, because in many cases it's not that women necessarily are disinterested in having children. It's that the process to have children, it's their own experience with their reproductive health has been so fraught. And I've heard what I'm about to share with you from very liberal reporters to very conservative friends. This is actually like not a political issue at all. This, I think, transcends it. But imagine if you're like an average 14 or 15-year-old girl, you're beginning to understand, experience a cycle, and you're having extreme pain every month. And that extreme pain continues either until you are put on hormonal birth control or you just sort of learn to deal with it. Or imagine that, you just like don't understand what's happening to your body. It feels like this very alienating, this very painful thing. It causes you to think about your own body, your own reproductive health through a very negative lens. And then imagine if those very painful symptoms were actually an indicator of something going wrong in your body that needed good medical assistance. But instead of receiving good medical assistance, you just receive something to suppress it. You come off of that suppressant years later in hopes of having children, and not only are these painful symptoms back, but now you're having difficulty having children. And so then you think, well, what's the solution? You turn to a very large one-size-fits-all technology rather than actually looking at these underlying causes. And I think like the relationship this sort of creates then is then like, okay, my body is somehow working against me. Having children is working against me. What's the quickest way out of this, or do I even want to engage with the discussion? And I think that's where culturally and like policy-wise we're seeing a lot of the debate, which is why we are working to promote access to things like restorative reproductive medicine that actually allow you to address your underlying reproductive health conditions and really focuses on empowering men and women from this young age of youth onwards to understand their reproductive health and the natural way their body works. The fact that you can only get pregnant 5 to 7 days out of every month. The average person doesn't know that, much less the average youth. What would it look like to actually encourage children as a natural part of life, beginning with good body literacy and actually understanding how your body naturally functions, when it's functioning abnormally, and how to like get the help that you need to actually address those conditions?
Thank you. We still have some time. Let me bring up a new but not completely new topic. One area where we consistently see higher fertility rates is among religious and traditional communities, both in Europe and beyond. Studies suggest that practicing religious communities tend to have higher birth rates and report greater overall life satisfaction compared to more secular populations. These communities often emphasize families as a core value, foster strong social support networks, and create environments where marriage and childbearing are seen as an integral to a fulfilling life rather than optional personal choices. Given these observations, what can a society learn from such communities? Are there specific aspects of their family structure, values, or support systems that could be applied on a larger scale to encourage childbearing? And to what extent is the connection between faith, community, and higher birth rates a universal trend across different cultures? What do you think? Feel free.
Okay, when I said that the communities have to be strengthened, then I thought of the communities which are standing on a value basis. There are a lot of youth communities and youth organizations here in Hungary, which can be the place of the young people's socialization, where they can find their partners. And I do think that the churches and the religious organizations also have a big capacity and a big role in that. So I think that those values are really important that we can get from the churches. And in my opinion, I think that, for example, actually, I am in youth organizations, and I see that if a young people who has traditional values in these organizations, for example, in the Scout movement or somewhere else, can find a young people who has the same values, they can more easily form a pair. So I think it can be a big help if we strengthen these communities.
So what is the number one thing that all faith traditions have in common? It's a belief in the transcendent, that there is something beyond yourself, beyond this life even, and that there is a greater value, a greater good that you are living for. And I think that is probably the universal, that's the universal value that corresponds with the desire to have children, because there is a hope in something beyond yourself. There's something greater than yourself that you're working towards. And so when we think particularly of this discussion on birth rates and having children, I think one of the things that frequently comes to mind is, what is the experience, if you go to church, right? Like if you're a Christian, like what is the experience just very practically? It's something that families are a part of, that it's not an individual thing where like I go to hang out with my female friends and my husband has his guy friends over there and we, the kids go to this like separate facility altogether. I'm not opposed to children's church. I think it's a blessing, but like thinking like big picture, right? Like church invites families in, and whether you're single or married, have children or don't, or older and it's beyond your season, you're constantly around families. You're being invited to small groups, to events where families are present. And I think that's one of the most natural ways to encourage children, is just when it's a part of your natural life, right? That babies are going to be passed around to different adults. And you constantly have a community to really to be around, to raise your children, to normalize it. Many conservatives, for good reasons, have made fun of Hillary Clinton's comment a number of years ago that it takes a village to raise a child. And certainly in the sense she meant it, right? That's not something we want to endorse. But it does require a village of people to have children, right? Like the reason that I'm here right now is because my mother was able to fly to stay with my husband and my toddler to help out. The reason I'm sitting up here right now is because I have friends holding my daughter in the back, right? Like there is no like single actor who's somehow able to do their own work without that larger community that faith just very naturally creates. And I think there's also there's an idea that religious communities tend to communicate well, which is this idea that this package deal of marriage, sex, and procreation. Catholic social teaching has a version of this. Protestants do. I think other religious faiths as well. That really recognizes this natural progression of marriage, sex, and procreation. That you're not just this individual autonomous person, but there's a healthy progression to life and things that's normalized well. And I think it's that constantly being reinforced for people from the personal and beyond that's so important. And sort of the last thing I'll say is, culturally speaking, I think just the normalization of children is so good. When I was first back from maternity leave with my first daughter, my superiors and my bosses at Heritage had always been very encouraging, like, bring your daughter to work, like, we love having babies here, babies are the best. And they had said this all the time. And so one time I had a very last minute news hit scheduled. I didn't have childcare, so I brought her in. One of the secretaries was holding her. I did the news hit. And as I was walking out of our studio, I saw an email from our vice president, and it said baby sounds, and my heart froze. And I was like, oh no, my child has been screaming, she's interrupted something. I did not know what to expect. And I clicked on the email, and the email simply said, Emma, it was such a blessing that you brought your daughter to work today. We heard her laughing, we heard her giggling, and I get emotional now even thinking about it, but they were like, it was just such a gift to hear the sound of a baby in our workplace. Thank you. And I teared up then, I teared up now, just like at those very small but very powerful indicators that children are welcome, that they're blessed, that this is a good thing. That I think, just it comes from people of faith into our workplaces and into our public life together.
Right. So I think thinking about how to promote or how to help protect and provide flourishing families. I think it is important to face kind of certainly at least one element of our culture here in Hungary or Central Eastern Europe, where I think our mothers, grandmothers, and grandmothers and fathers, obviously our parents back years ago, have been having very hard lives. I think they have had to struggle a lot, and I think that at least I face this many times in everyday life when we go to church or we are this movement, in the name of this movement of more babies in public spaces and similar, that there are these perplexed or not homogeneously happy moments or difficulties to acknowledge, to accommodate, to normalize, especially many children being in those spaces, or comments about why at all to talk about motherhood or parenthood. Is it not just something that you have to just take up with, just suffer through, and in the end you will have beautiful kids, and that's the gift, and that's your reward. But being a mother, being a parent is somehow, and I'm here obviously simplifying and trying to make a point, that is mostly sacrifice, is mostly suffering, is mostly giving up yourself. And in our culture, I think sacrifice is not rewarded that much. It's not an attractive thing to come suffer. You are going to be a mother, and that, you better not talk about it. You better not victimize yourself. You better not heroize yourself. Or just do it and wait until it's over, and then you will be happy to see the results. I was during last summer in a cultural festival where there was a philosophy coffee house where we were talking about motherhood, and there were these young, I don't think they were more than 18-year-old girls who came to that session, and kind of full of anger, but authentic, true dissatisfaction and anger. They said, this whole thing is unfair, this whole thing is unjust, because it's only mothers who usually do the caretaking. It is not recognized culturally as something worthwhile to do. And they went on and on about this bitterness, and I had this question in myself: where is this coming from? Because certainly they themselves have not that authentic experience. Have they seen their mothers? Have they seen their grandparents? Have they seen their grandmothers? So I also think that that we have to. It's not enough just to communicate this. It's impossible to persuade somebody to have faith. It's impossible to persuade somebody merely through communication to have children. It's what we make them see, if we are able, of course, if we have that blessing and grace to be able to show, to share, to invite, to have an authentic experience about in what else it is more than just a sacrifice, because it is indeed a sacrifice. It is indeed indeed difficult, but it is so much more than that. And so I think there are these healing strategies too that are important. I often think about my grandparents, my grandmothers, who have certainly not had the chance to enjoy arts as mothers, to go and participate in a conversation and have an intellectual life if they wanted to. But I think mothers and parents should all be able to have that. And society should be able to see them capable of having that. That should be something that is valued, that is good, that a mother can live a flourishing life, because that's how they can transmit that flourishing to their husbands, to their children. Thank you. So, and one last thought is also, I wanted to say, part of the solution certainly is to fix marriages, because without help, I think that's what mothers who are taking care of children, fathers taking care of children need. They need help, like actual help. And I share this last kind of personal note that it's literally also the reason why I can be here is that my husband canceled his full day because our smaller children just get sick and this fever at home. So without him, I truly couldn't be here. But obviously on a higher level, I couldn't be here as well. So I think that's somehow must be part of the picture. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I still have questions, but unfortunately our time for this discussion has come to an end. This has been a truly insightful and thought-provoking conversation on one of the most pressing challenges of our time. I would like to thank Emma, Johanna, Gergő, our esteemed panelists, for sharing their valuable insights and expertise with us today. A special thank you as well to Dr. Georgina Kiskozmas for presenting the latest findings from the Youth Research Institute, which will be available soon on our website. And of course, thank you to our audience. Have a wonderful rest of your day here.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you are sufficiently refreshed from your coffee break. Okay. So, what an honor it is for me to introduce our next keynote speaker. Robert Palladino is the new Chargé d'Affaires at the U.S. Embassy here in Budapest. He assumed leadership of the Embassy of the United States to Hungary on March 7th, 2025, so very recently. He is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service with extensive experience addressing critical foreign policy and national security challenges across Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. He most recently served as Deputy Executive Secretary in the Office of the Secretary of State. Previously, Mr. Palladino held key leadership roles, including U.S. Consul General to the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and during President Trump's first term, Chief of Staff to then Deputy Secretary of State Stephen E. Biegun, Deputy Spokesperson for the Department of State, and Director of Strategic Communications and Acting National Security Council Spokesperson. Mr. Palladino has served in a variety of overseas postings spanning Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Before joining the Department of State, he served in the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General Corps, JAG, practicing law in both Asia and Europe. He holds degrees from the University of Notre Dame, Washington and Lee University School of Law, and the U.S. Army War College. He speaks Mandarin, Chinese, and Italian, and is married with 2 daughters. I love how all of these men are including their children in their bios. That's really special. Mr. Palladino, such an honor.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. We are doing something a little bit different this morning. Melissa, when was the last time the Embassy of the United States of America in Budapest accepted an offer to speak at the Danube Institute? So, well, yes, ladies and gentlemen, elections have consequences. And the United States and Hungary are opening a new chapter, and I'm truly honored to represent the United States and be a guest of the Danube Institute. I departed Washington a little over 3 weeks ago, but before I departed, I sketched out a short to-do list of things that I wanted to accomplish sooner than later upon arrival. And accepting an invitation from the Danube Institute allows me to cross one event off that to-do list. So thank you very much, especially to John and Melissa, for this invitation. I salute the work that the Danube Institute is doing to bring together Americans, Hungarians, and other free thinkers to connect, build trust and confidence, and expand their national perspectives into a broader network of common sense that transcends borders. This network addresses issues that cut across domestic, legal, and even national security priorities, and it contributes to an emerging ecosystem that is unafraid to challenge progressive orthodoxy. So thank you for bringing together people of goodwill to promote good governance and the common good, and for your commitment to advancing serious, respectful dialogue on issues of consequence. For the Trump administration, the principles of marriage, family, and their role in public policy remain crucial. I worked at the White House during President Trump's first term, and the president and his team understood that a strong family forms the essential foundation of a stable and prosperous nation. This conviction informed numerous policies designed to empower families, protect traditional values, and provide economic opportunities. Given that the president, again, campaigned on these values, I think Americans can expect a stronger second term as the president continues to swiftly drive change in Washington. Humbly submitted, here are 3 Trump administration lines of effort to strengthen families. What's interesting and perhaps worth further discussing, as I'm sure you will, are the overlap and differences between American and Hungarian policies on tax relief, parental rights, and drug enforcement. So, number 1, tax relief to help families. Through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, the Trump administration doubled the child tax credit, providing substantial relief to working families. And lowering overall tax rates also allowed families to keep more of their hard-earned income, ensuring that they have financial resources that they need to thrive. Similarly, Hungary has prioritized pro-family tax policies, offering substantial deductions for parents and even lifetime income tax exemptions for mothers with 4 or more children. That's an area where that could provide valuable insights, perhaps to American policymakers. Number 2, empowering parents. The Trump administration has championed school choice through education savings accounts, vouchers, and charter school programs, ensuring that families and not bureaucrats decide where their children are educated. Former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos led these efforts in the first term, and Secretary of Education Linda McMahon is now continuing the push to return educational decision-making to the states and closer to parents. Hungary's taken a similarly strong stance on parental rights, emphasizing traditional values in education policy, and restricting external ideological influences in schools, highlighting an area of shared priorities with different legal and cultural approaches. And finally, number 3, combating the opioid crisis. The Trump administration recognized the devastating impact of the opioid epidemic on families, and they declared a public health emergency and directed unprecedented resources towards prevention, treatment, and recovery. A key pillar of this effort is securing the border to stop the flow of deadly fentanyl, one of the most lethal threats to the American family. And Hungary, though facing a different drug landscape, has pursued strict anti-drug policies and border security measures, reinforcing that link between national sovereignty and public health. So by exploring these policy intersections, we can identify lessons from both nations on how best to support the family, uphold parental rights, and to protect communities. But when it comes to families and public policy, it's about more than just finances and security. It's also about something bigger, an American vibe shift. Vice President Vance captured this sentiment at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast in February, saying, quote, "The deepest and most important things are not material. They're not GDP. They're not the numbers we see in the stock market. The real measure of health in a society is the safety, stability, and well-being of our families and our people. In President Trump's administration, we're in the business of producing prosperity, but that prosperity is a means to an end, the flourishing of every single citizen in the United States of America." So thank you once again for inviting me. Thank you for caring about the deep things, the flourishing of children, and the health and sanctity of marriage and the family. I wish you best wishes and hope that your discussions bear fruit for the United States, for Hungary, and for the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Palladino. We're just so happy that you're here. Okay, I'd like to introduce our next panel for the day by introducing our moderator, Zsófia Rácz, who is the editor-in-chief of the Hungarian Conservative, former Deputy Secretary, State Secretary of Youth Affairs of Hungary, and who has put so much work into organizing this conference, for which I'm also just incredibly grateful. So Zsófia began her professional career at the United Nations, where she represented Hungarian youth as Hungary's UN Youth Delegate from 2017 to 2018. In the summer of 2019, as a Magyar Foundation Fellowship grantee, she spent 6 months researching and working at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. Her international advocacy work was later followed by serving the interests of Hungarian youth From 2020 to 2022, she worked as Deputy State Secretary for Youth Affairs, first at the Ministry of Human Resources, and then at the Prime Minister's office alongside the Minister for Families. From 2022 to 2023, she worked as a ministerial commissioner at the Ministry of Territorial Development, where her responsibilities included supporting and facilitating the retention and success of young people in their local communities. At the Danube Institute, her focus remains on supporting youth and nurturing talent as Zofia leads and coordinates our internship program, assisting both interns and researchers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for this lengthy introduction and for being the mastermind behind this wonderful conference that we have. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. I'm going to quickly tell you the plan for our panel today. What we are going to do, what we have agreed with my fellow panelists, is we are going to have each of them individually have about a 10-minute speech where they will present their work and their focus and why they are here at this conference. And once they are all done with their 10-minute speeches, we are going to have what's hopefully going to be lively discussion about marriage and family policy. That's our topic for today. Ladies first, I'm going to call Fiona Bruce to speak, who used to be a conservative member of the UK Parliament for Congleton from 2010 to 2024. She's also a professional solicitor and founder and senior partner of the Fiona Bruce Solicitors LLP. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone, and it's an honour to be here. And I have to confess, actually, why am I here? Well, actually, my son was asked, do you know anyone who could speak about the family? And and he's here today, and isn't it wonderful that he thought his mum could speak? So thank you, Sam. I was elected to the UK Parliament in 2010, and I'm particularly delighted to be here today because there was no subject that I was more passionate about then when I entered Parliament than strengthening families. It's something I had the privilege of working on in the UK Parliament as a backbencher for much of a decade, an issue I focused on encouraging, pushing, pressing, cajoling, calling on our then Conservative government, and we had a Conservative government in the UK from 2010 to 2014, to put in place policies that would strengthen family life. I'm going to speak in particular about the 10-year campaign to encourage our government to put in place family hubs. I have to say that I'm very sad to have to report the situation regarding the family in our country today. It grieves me. To our shame, we have one of the highest levels of family breakdown in the world. Fatherlessness is high. Over 1 million boys are growing up with no relationship of any meaningfulness with their father. Record numbers of children are taken into state care every year. By the age of 5, almost half our children have experienced a brokenness in their home and grow up without two parents together. We have an explosion of mental health problems. I was patron of a charity that helped young children with mental health problems for many years, and I once asked the chief executive, how many of the young children who come to see you with these mental health problems have got in the background dysfunctional family relationships? And he looked at me as though I was stupid. And of course, a lot of people do look at members of Parliament as if we're stupid. Who would do that job? He said, Fiona, he said, all of them. All of them. So, after I got into Parliament in 2010, I and 3 other Conservative members of Parliament, all Christians, worked together to press our then Prime Minister, David Cameron to implement some family policies. I have to say that fear, I believe, of being accused of telling people how to live their lives, of being a so-called nanny state from the top of government, whilst he himself had a strong family life and clearly believed in how beneficial that was in terms, particularly children's life chances, yet very little was done in policy terms to strengthen family life and tackle this crisis in our nation. Indeed, the only policy I can recall by the next general election in 2015 was the introduction of a marriage allowance, and that was worth actually only just over £200 a year. Barely worth anyone claiming. So, 2015 came and went, another general election, and nothing in the manifesto to support families. In 2016, as chair of a cross-party group in Parliament on children's centres, I produced a report called Family Hubs, the Future of Children's Centres, Strengthening Family Relationships to Improve Life Chances for Everyone. And I hoped that would encourage the then government to look at family hubs and other policies for strengthening family. Just as an aside, what is a family hub? Well, it is actually the go-to place, a building for any parent in any community. This was our vision, to have a go-to place for any parent where they could have help for any problem that they had relating to family life, whether it was childcare, parenting, counselling on their own relationship, debt advice, employment, addiction, and other areas of need, which we all go through. The wonderful thing about the vision of a family hub is there's no stigma attached to it. There's no judgment. This is for us all, because we all will have challenges going through our family lives. But again, another parliament came and went. We had another Prime Minister, Theresa May, again, who had a strong marriage, believed in this issue, but policy change did not happen. We had, in fact, a very small change. We had £6 million that was provided to help the children whose parents were alcohol addicted, and that was simply because the health minister had caught hold of the vision. And we had a troubled families initiative. That was a very narrow project to help the most troubled families. But it worked, but it worked only to an extent, and it highlighted one of the real problems that we had in our country in helping families with problems, which was that professional social workers worked in silos. They worked on their individual specialism. And I remember one particular family which was troubled. They had truancy from school, they had addiction, drug dealing, worklessness. There were 26 social workers helping that family, and they weren't working in a coordinated way. Much more was needed. So we decided to produce our own manifesto, having now gone through the third general election without anything in manifestos to support families. And this was the manifesto we produced, and it was a document with 18 policy proposals for the UK government, starting with the need for a cabinet-level government minister to ensure that family life was supported across government in our country. Because as we know, dysfunctional families cost a country. There was an estimate of over 50 billion at that time in our country. It was really much more, but it affected housing, it affected work, it affected health, it affected schools, education. All these government departments needed to work together. So the manifesto then, as the second policy, said we should have family hubs in each locality. At that time, what was happening was a very narrow area of work, which was a legacy from the previous socialist government. And it was called the Sure Start system, where families could get some help from 0 to 5. But it was really focused on those families in the most deprived, 20% most deprived areas, and it was state-led. It wasn't working. I'm very pleased to say that in the 2019 manifesto, finally, family got a mention. Only a couple of lines, but it was in there. And once you have a government with something in a manifesto, you can work on it. And we did. We met with government ministers. We held fairs in Parliament where just a few local authorities across the country had actually caught the vision of what we were trying to do. They'd read the paper that we'd written in 2016. So we had, for example, the Isle of Wight had got family hubs going on the Isle of Wight, and they'd already shown that because of the help they were giving families there, fewer children were going into care, into the state system. Another family hub was in my own area, where there was one in a school, and when the children were underperforming in school or they had special needs, the headmaster worked with the whole family. He brought the whole family into school. He worked with them after school. He looked at how he could get help for their other problems so that those children could be schooled better. And within a very short space of time, just 2 or 3 years, he'd seen their exam results, their GCSE results at 16, improve in that school. And then there was a real boost. We took about 25 of our family champions. We'd got over 50 members of parliament to sign up to this, and they were family champions, and we took them to see the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was Chancellor under Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak. And we said, we need some funding because we can see this is working. There are many benefits. It's a one-stop shop place. It's a place where the state and voluntary organisations can work together to help families. There's no stigma to go. It's non-threatening. It's truly cross-party. It will be self-sustaining once the business buildings got up and running. Then the local community, the local authority can keep these going. But we need some transformation money. And we asked for £100 million. He looked at us and sent us away. And I thought that was it. And then shortly afterwards he said, I've listened to what you said. I've heard about the examples you've given us. I'm going to give you £300 million. £100 million over 3 years from 2021 to roll this out across 75 local authorities. That's half the country. There are about 150 local authorities across the country. That was the boost that was needed. And I'm going to end now because I can see that Sophia's looking at me. But I just want to tell you that there was a report in 2014 done by the Centre for Social Justice. They said, and this is in a very short space of time, family hubs have become the central trusted point of access for families. They'd done some work over 2013, 2014, a kind of interim report on how family hubs are going, and they'd calculated that there were 388 family hubs then in 88 local authorities. Some local authorities had set them up with no money at all from central government. And we've also had now a report saying that there has been consistent buy-in from parents and carers for the holistic model of the provision that meets families' diverse needs. It's helping the whole family and it's involving the whole community. And I'll just finish with this. There are now over 130 local authorities with family hubs. There are 942 family hubs in the country and growing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just to set the record straight, that was a look of admiration. No, it's fine. Thank you very much, Fiona. We're going to discuss that further in details. And now it's my pleasure to call Brad Littlejohn to the stage. Until recently, Brad used to be a fellow at the EPPC's Technology in Human Flourishing and Evangelicals in Civic Life programs, and now he's the Director of Programs and Education at the American Compass. Brad, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It is indeed an honor to be here. My remarks are going to be a little bit longer, by the permission of my other panelists. Helen invited me here to give a kind of report from the front lines of the anti-porn counter-revolution, and that requires giving a little bit of backstory on how porn became so entrenched in our public life and laws. So we're here today to discuss family policy, that is to say, what policymakers can do to encourage family formation, fertility, and stability. In recent years, many social conservatives have pivoted away from an older emphasis on so-called family values towards simply valuing families as such. Instead of agitating against public vice and indecency and highlighting the wreckage left by each fresh wave of the sexual revolution, conservatives have made the more modest appeal that society should support those who wish to get married and start families. Instead of warning of moral collapse, they've warned of demographic collapse. And instead of vice laws, they've called for tax breaks. Now, there's very good reasons for this pivot. Moderns don't like being preached at, and social conservatives were tired of getting beaten in every battle of the culture war that they engaged. It felt like it was better to shift the debate to more neutral, secular ground where they could argue with hard numbers and sociological data. And of course, the demographic crisis, as we were hearing in the last panel, has become too great to ignore. Just getting people to start having children again seems more important than what these children are exposed to. Now, this is all fair enough, but I would warn that it is one-sided and short-sighted. For the problem of family formation is more a cultural than an economic one. People will not marry, stay married, and have children unless they are internalized a hierarchy of values radically at odds with the sexual revolution. And it matters what sort of world we bring children into. If it is one that ravages their souls and commodifies their bodies, many of them may find themselves wishing they had never been born. And indeed, rates of teen suicide are, I think, the highest in history in America right now. So conservatives cannot afford to ignore the scourge of pornography, crusades against which were once a mainstay of the moral majority movement in the 80s and 90s. Needless to say, today's porn makes the Playboy centerfolds of yesteryear look like child's play. In place of still images are 4K films. In place of nudes are hardcore sex scenes featuring every kind of degradation one can imagine, and many that one cannot, from incest and bestiality to gang rape scenes. Through platforms like OnlyFans, porn has become live and interactive, a thriving industry of legalized digital prostitution. And you don't have to go to seedy stores to access this material. You just have to reach into your pocket. So for this reason, the greatest horror of modern pornography is that it has become child's play. The average age of first exposure is now 11, with many children already addicted to violent pornography by the time they are 8 or 9. There's no greater enemy to family formation and stability. Pornography destroys marriages, and it keeps marriages from forming in the first place, as young men prefer to find sexual satisfaction in effortless online encounters than in the commitment to an embodied woman, and as young women, traumatized by the abusive sex that porn has taught them to expect, dare not entrust themselves to such a relationship. Even more fundamentally, though, porn's colonization of childhood has warped the very foundations of family life by dissolving the boundary of childhood and adulthood, which is essential to the foundations of a healthy civilization. Society once understood that there were certain places that only adults could go, certain things that only adults could talk about, certain activities that only adults could engage in. Because young humans, like young plants or animals, are fragile while still developing, we recognize the need to shelter and support them in special ways so that we can increase their chance of emerging into adulthood strong and mature. In other words, if we cannot guard childhood as childhood, neither will we have adulthood as we have known it and as civilization requires it. That is to say, fully developed agents capable of restraining their desires, of making commitments and following through on them, and of distinguishing fantasy from reality. Now, in the physical world, if you want to attend a concert, you have to travel to the location and get in through the door, which might be difficult if there's a bouncer. However, you can access a website from anywhere at any time, and generally whatever your age. This last has become perhaps the most culturally significant feature of the internet. In the early days of the internet, Congress tried to take some steps to ensure that this new virtual world developed along parallel tracks to the physical world. They sought to require the creation of age-gated spaces online. Now, although the first such attempt was stricken down by the Supreme Court in 1997, Justice O'Connor noted that the basic aspiration behind the law was laudable, and that as soon as technology could catch up, it would be desirable to, quote, construct barriers in cyberspace and use them to screen for identity, making cyberspace more like the physical world and consequently more amenable to zoning laws. Sorry, page won't turn. There we go. Now, although she was optimistic that this transformation of cyberspace was already underway in 1997, she failed to realize that without strong legal nudging, the incentive structures for the burgeoning internet industry pointed all in the other direction. The fewer the barriers to the flow of people, information, and yes, pornography around the internet, the more money there was to be made. So when a second congressional effort finally made its way to the Supreme Court in 2004, the court deemed that the technology was still not suitable for age verification, which would impose an intolerable privacy burden on adult users. The result was that for the next 2 decades, the internet developed along a radically different track from the physical world. It was an unbounded, largely unregulated space where children could easily participate in adult conversations and activities. Now, this might not have been so terrible if the digital world itself had remained an enclosed realm that was hard to enter, as it had been in the 1990s. But with the advent of smartphones in 2007, and many parents' short-sighted rush to buy them for their children, any barrier between physical and digital worlds came crashing down in a hurry. The result is what Jonathan Haidt has called a screen-based childhood. But that is a misnomer, for it wasn't childhood at all, which is a concept that presumes boundaries between adult and child experiences. Instead, children were immediately accelerated into the adult world, whether that was merely the disorienting and overwhelming networks of social media, or the darkest and most disturbing corners of the adult world, like online pornography. As a result, they were robbed of childhood, and their brains, unprepared for such experiences, were hijacked and their development stunted. Now, thus far, I've told a gloomy story, a story so gloomy that social conservatives could be forgiven for simply throwing in the towel on family values and focusing on more plausible political priorities like child tax credits. By 2021, when OnlyFans stars were colonizing every corner of social media with their peep shows, the pornification of our culture seemed the ultimate one-way ratchet, with the only possible refuge of parents being so-called postman pledge enclaves. But all that has at last begun to change. Over just the last 2 years, a new movement in defense of childhood has exploded onto the scene. More and more parents and policymakers from across the political spectrum have realized that the only way to protect childhood is to force the digital realm to begin to roughly mimic the kinds of boundaries between adult and child spaces that exist in the physical world. As of today, 21 states in the U.S. have passed laws requiring robust, secure age verification measures on pornographic websites, and 16 more states are currently working on such laws. Another 3 states have enacted age verification for social media, and Utah just became the first state to require age verification for App Store downloads. Similar developments have gained traction internationally, from France to Australia. Now, the tech industry and porn industries have fought back tooth and nail. They understand that their massive profit margins depend on addicting customers when they're young and maintaining a maximally frictionless experience for all users. So they fought one law, Texas's HB 1181, all the way to the Supreme Court earlier this year. A decision in that case, Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, is set to be handed down very soon, and it could prove to be one of the most important cases in the history of the internet. At stake is not just one law, nor indeed the 20 other similar state laws, nor indeed minors' access to online pornography alone. At stake is the principle, can we start zoning the internet to protect childhood? Now, this case came before the court on appeal from the Fifth Circuit, which had not only ruled in Texas's favor, but it surprised many legal analysts by basically saying that this was hardly even a question. Of course, Texas has the right to require age verification for pornography. After all, minors have no constitutional right to access such material, and although age verification might be a bit of an inconvenience for adults, it hardly amounted to a meaningful burden on their access to speech. Now, truthfully, I would say adults don't have a constitutional right to access pornography either, but that's a battle for another day. Now, so the Fifth Circuit said that this law only had to meet the broad standard of rational basis, as did similar age-gating laws on brick-and-mortar stores. In the 2004 Ashcroft decision, however, the court had ruled that age verification did meaningfully burden adult access, and thus triggered the burden of strict scrutiny, which can only be met by showing that there is no other less restrictive means of achieving the compelling government interest. The porn industry has always maintained that parental control software was a less restrictive but perfectly adequate means of getting the job done. And this was an argument that the Supreme Court bought back in 2004. In my own amicus brief, co-authored with my colleague Claire Morel, we argued that this was ridiculous. Parental controls are woefully inadequate in the current state of the internet. Ours was one of 27 briefs filed by a coalition that we helped mobilize, from the Feminist Women's Liberation Front to the anti-sex trafficking group Exodus Cry, to the American Foundation for Addiction Research, to more traditional religious conservative groups like the Family Policy Alliance and Latter-day Saints. And although we were excited by the size and scope of the coalition that came together, we tried to manage our expectations because most veteran legal observers thought that Texas didn't stand much of a chance. The porn industry has had an almost unbroken string of success before the Supreme Court over the last 40 years. And even many conservatives expected the court to slap down the Fifth Circuit's ruling as a fundamental break with precedent. Instead, during oral arguments in January, the justices shocked almost everyone by pummeling the porn industry representatives from start to finish. Many justices seemed willing to fundamentally revisit precedent and begin subjecting online vendors to the same age verification requirements as liquor stores and nightclubs. A couple of things were particularly striking. The porn industry's line throughout this litigation has been that while of course kids probably shouldn't watch this stuff, there's no evidence that it is a serious mental health problem, and that they've said that any talk of porn addiction is mere pseudoscience. However, the justices seem to totally ignore this argument. That not a single justice questioned that youth porn exposure is a public health crisis calling for urgent government action. Also, not a single justice seemed interested in the porn lobby's argument that parental controls can get the job done just fine. And this is where having parents in public places helps. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was the first one to ask questions, and she's like, as a mother, I can tell you that parental controls are not getting the job done. So this is quite extraordinary because in the 2004 Ashcroft decision, that was a bedrock of the court's argument. That basically they said, by all means protect kids, but you can just do that with existing software. So most parents know better, and thank goodness now the justices do as well. So it seems that a solid majority of justices feel that some kind of age verification should be able to survive constitutional scrutiny. The only questions are whether the details of Texas's law might need some tweaking, and whether the case could be fit into prior precedent or requires directly overturning that precedent. Now, of course, nothing is certain. We won't know for sure until the justices hand down their decision in the next couple months. But the upshot is this. It seems very likely that the court will soon hand down a judgment making clear that states will have meaningful room to maneuver on age zoning the internet from this day forward, for the first time in the history of the internet. If so, it will be a pivotal day in the history of the internet and a pivotal day in the battle to defend childhood, which is to say, to defend the very future of our society. Now, I'll conclude by just briefly suggesting three broader lessons from this counter-revolution. The first is to say that technology is both foe and friend. Advanced tech is part of what has made porn so pernicious in our society today. But even more advanced tech has now made secure age verification possible. Technology isn't going anywhere, so conservatives need to learn how to harness it to secure the future of the family. The second thing I want to say is never give up on reality as a lost cause. The porn industry flourishes by getting people to close their eyes to the reality of what embodied sexuality is like and the reality of the exploitation that its industry purveys. Reality is stubborn, and although long buried, it will fight back. The porn industry has grown more and more shameless in purveying its lies as normal, and regular people are now ready to resist. Finally, reality makes unlikely bedfellows. The anti-porn movement can unite radical feminists and tradwives. It can unite neuroscientists, sociologists, and religious leaders. It can unite parents' rights advocates and child's rights advocates. So can other movements, and I hope social conservatives can learn from this success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad, for putting the spotlight on this very important topic. We're going to discuss it in details very soon, but before that, it's our pleasure to have Patrick Brown today here with us, who is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, where his work with the Life and Family Initiative focuses on developing a robust pro-family economic agenda and supporting families as the cornerstone of a healthy and flourishing society. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Helen, and the crew for organizing this wonderful conference. It's a pleasure to be in Budapest. I have to admit, speaking about pro-family policy in Hungary feels a little bit like, I don't know, giving barbecue tips in Texas or talking to Germans about how to make a good beer. This is where the energy is happening, and I'm more used to telling my American friends to look at what Hungary is doing and to learn from their energies and their enthusiasms around building a pro-family society. I think there's a lot to learn, and we can get into what lessons are applicable to the American experience. But what I appreciate most about this conference is its broad remit, the scope that we see both in the way that today's and tomorrow's lectures are structured, because everything properly construed is about family policy. When you come down to it, the way we design our streets and police our cities and orient our schooling, our labor markets, our churches, our communities, all can either advance a more pro-family view of society or be ambivalent towards it, which is in fact anti-natal, anti-family in its own way. Questions about family policy are personal, they're deep, intimate, they're very difficult for policymakers to get at directly. So the best we can do, I think, as people who are influencing policy and helping our leaders think through these issues is aim for setting the preconditions to make it more likely that these relationships will bear fruit eventually. And to do that, I think we have to recognize the family along two key dimensions, both as an economic institution as well as a cultural one. We've heard a little bit today about some of the economic barriers to family formation, and they're real. I think it's more helpful to think about not just the out-of-pocket costs of having a child, which maybe have gone up over time, housing being a particular one, but also the opportunity costs. I know we'll hear from Catherine Picolic later. Her great book, Hannah's Children, talks a lot about this. What you have to give up in order to start a family, that's gone up over time as wages increase, education increases, opportunities, professional and otherwise increase. And so it's more costly relative to not having children today than it may have been a half century ago. I think that's a big driver of declining fertility. And we in this room know why that ultimately matters, why the director said earlier, the Western European mindset, well, this is just individual preferences and we can just sort of let these things express themselves the way they go. That doesn't work because we need society to, society relies on the contributions of parents. Parents are bearing the cost of raising kids individually, but the benefits flow to the rest of society, preserving our civilization, but also future taxpayers, job creators, all the rest. Economists would call this a positive social externality, right? This is something that we need to have supportive, proactive public policy in order to help families thrive and to balance some of the imbalance between childless couples or childless individuals and those who undertake the great work of starting families. So part of lowering the cost of having children is lowering the cost of living altogether. I mentioned housing. We know from empirical research that has a direct relationship with fertility rates. Part of the U.S. baby boom in the post-war period has been shown to be directly linked to the building boom that we had in the same time period. And I think this is one area in which this sort of traditional conservative supply-side approach, trusting the power of the free market and free market enterprise system to really drive costs down and increase competition, that's something that we can really rely on in sectors of the economy like housing and healthcare, injecting a more competitive spirit, getting rid of some of the barriers, zoning laws and environmental review and sort of these things. I think that's should be considered part of a pro-family agenda. But that's, the economics, we can talk about that on the panel if we have a chance. I think the cultural dimension is what we've heard from already and is the central story of why we see a birth rate decline in the U.S. and across the globe. In the U.S. particularly, it's a story of marriage. And you can't talk about the decline in birth rates in the U.S. without talking about the decline in marriage. If you look since 2007, which was peak baby in the United States, birth rates, or the number of births has fallen by about 17% since then. 30%, or I should say, the decline among single women has been 30%. Married fertility has remained mostly flat, dipped a little bit. So if you want to fix declining birth rates, you have to get women married. And in some respects, as somebody who believes that it is best for a child to be growing up in a two-parent household, we should be grateful that we've seen a decline in children being born out of wedlock. But it would be even better if those women were getting married, and they're not. In 1980, the U.S. saw 2.3 million marriages over the course of the year. That works out to be about 17,000 a week, or no, 45,000 a week. In 2022, our population was 40% bigger. We still saw 2.3 million marriages over the course of the year, where the number of marriages didn't increase at all over 4 decades, despite our population growing, which meant that by now, for the first time in American history, more American women are unmarried than are married currently. That's a sea change, sociologically speaking, and that's at the core of why we're seeing decreased fertility. Now, unpacking that story would take a whole conference on its own, but let me just stipulate that marriage was once seen as a sort of social necessity. If you wanted a certain amount of economic stability, social status, a partner for having sex, having kids, those were sort of seen as ordained within marriage. Now we've debundled the institution of marriage. It's now seen more, to borrow a phrase from the sociologist Andrew Cherlin, as a capstone rather than a cornerstone. You have all your ducks in a row, you've bought an apartment, you found somebody, you're living together, okay, let's walk down the aisle and get married. I don't think there's any accident that the average age of marriage, first marriage in the U.S. has risen from 24 for men in 1980 to 30 now. For women, it's risen from 22 to 28. Here in Hungary, it's even higher. 33 for men, 31 for women. That's a sign that young adults are seeing that time of life that could be so conducive to fertility we heard about earlier as a sign, as a time to, live life and then settle down, rather than seeing marriage as something that you should embark on together and start life together. And what's even worse, especially in America, is that there's a bifurcation along class lines. College-educated Americans are the ones who are doing, following the order, and they get their ducks in a row and they get married. Working class Americans aren't. They're the ones that have seen the most precipitous decline in marriage, Americans without a college degree. And they're the ones who should benefit most from the stability of being able to share the responsibilities of having a partner, or the economies of scale of having someone to split costs and share incomes with. Yet, while this sociological phenomenon, these trends are happening, too much of our political momentum in the United States is pushing a soft lifestyle libertarianism that is, I think, poisonous towards healthy family formation. We heard from Brad about pornography. That's obviously a major concern for men. Also, marijuana legalization, which has swept the U.S., speculation in cryptocurrency, the expansion of sports betting on your smartphone in pretty much every corner of American life. These all sort of encourage men to persist in an extended adolescence rather than seeking out a stable relationship. And it's particularly bad for men without college degrees. They're already doing worse in school than women. Their labor market outcomes aren't what they were. They're more susceptible to the opioid epidemic that we heard from Sergei Palladino earlier. This is a crisis, and it's no wonder that marriage rates are falling. There's no silver bullet answer to these trends, obviously, but at least starting from that mindset of what can we be doing to change the way that we educate, to change the way we train young men to enter the labor force, to think about ways that we can reorient our civic institutions to grapple with this new reality. I think that's, and then again, the cost of living and housing, that sort of thing. I think that's where the meat of a pro-family agenda has to move. It should include things like expanding the child tax credit. Obviously, I'm a full supporter of that, but it has to think broader than that as well. The lowest hanging fruit in the U.S. is our current policy of just absolutely mind-boggling stupidity, which is subsidizing cohabitation over marriage in our safety net and transfer programs. This is something that Hungary has actually succeeded in reversing, right? In the last couple of years, you were following the same trend as most of the West, and you've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of babies being born out of wedlock. That is a tremendous success story. You should all be very proud of that, and that's something that Americans should examine, should study study from should learn what benefits can we make contingent on marriage and encourage couples who are starting a family to make it official, because we know the benefits to society and to themselves that flow from that. The U.S. being the leader in single-parent households is not a title we should aspire to. I think we could also learn from some of the other visible, gestures that Hungary's done. I'd love to see the U.S. government require that federal programs and facilities, reserve stroller-friendly parking for young parents, hold a summit on the family at the White House. I'd love to invite MP Bruce to talk about family hubs to red state governors and set up commissions to talk about the future of the family. These conversations are happening, as we heard from Emma earlier, but they're still seen as a little maybe outre or not in the mainstream. And I think part of that, and I know I'm running out of time, but I'll just say part of that is because some of the loudest voices are always also some of the weirdest ones. The world's richest man is a very vocal, prominent proponent of the idea that we're facing a civilizational crisis, and he also goes about solving that problem in a really eccentric way. Finding strange bedfellows is fine, but being clear about where we disagree about the fundamental anthropology of the human person is even more important. I think that's going to be essential for our movement going forward. I'd also, I think we can talk about more in the panel about, the Hungarian model of family policy is maybe more egalitarian, making sure that our policies aren't unduly skewed to the preferences of working families versus those with a stay-at-home parent. These are all prudential questions that are going to look different in different places. But ultimately, pursuing the goal of stable families and strong marriages is going to be a vital source of stability for children and their parents, but also the best way of addressing our declining birth rate problem. Being clear about that goal is essential, and it starts with refunctionalizing the family, both economically and culturally. So, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And now it's my honor to call Tim Carney to speak, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he works on civil society, family, localism, religion in America, economic competition, and electoral politics. Tim.
Thank you. Thank everyone for coming, and I appreciate the Danube Institute's invitation. This is my first trip to Budapest. I'm very happy to be here. First, what should have been in my bio is my wife and I, we have 6 children. So for those of you who, thank you. Those of you who pray for my wife, who is home with those 6 children while I'm here. I got to spend my first 24 hours walking around and interviewing people on the sort of man-on-the-street interviews, man-in-the-pub interviews about family policy here. I learned a couple things. One is when I'm from New York. I'd done the same sort of thing in Israel. In Israel and New York, if you ask somebody their opinion, they give it to you. Hungarians, not always so open. But one of the things that I have really appreciated about the Hungarians is that twice when I mentioned I had 6 kids, I had 2 different people say, "You look too young to have 6 kids." My wife gets that all the time. I don't get that anywhere else. So I don't know whether it's because they smoke more cigarettes here or whatever. But then I come here, and another man with 6 kids, and I think, "You look too young to be a Habsburg." But maybe that's... Maybe that's a problem with my history classes in the U.S. So I wrote a book that came out last year. I wanted to call it One Big Happy Family, but my wife pointed out that every time that I yell at my children, they would wave that book title in my family. Happy Family, really, Dad? And my publisher said, no, we needed a negative title, and that he was convinced. So Family Unfriendly was the title of the book. But I want to talk about what family friendly would be. And one of the men I met yesterday was named Gabor, a father of 2 up on the mountain there, the nearby neighborhood. And he said, I said, "Is this a good place to raise a kid?" He said, "It depends on your specific environment." And I thought his answer was great. That family friendly is a broad. I often use the term of an ecosystem. It's complicated. It's very complicated. And what we mean by family-friendly both bears on the birth rate, what can solve our crisis of demographics, but also in the U.S., our government has said that there's an epidemic of childhood anxiety. So something that is family-friendly might or might not increase the birth rate, but it could address childhood anxiety, and it could also address parental stress. So I break things down into a few categories. The first one is economics. And I start with economics not because it's the most important, but because it's the easiest to access. And there's a lot of evidence in the U.S. that economics is a very inadequate explanation, at least for the birth rate collapse. From 2008, when our birth rate started falling, we had a much worse economy in 2008, 2009, 2010 than we did in, say, 2019, right before the pandemic. That was the best economy anybody in this room, anybody of my age in the U.S., any of us have ever seen. The birth rate was about 2 in 2008, and it fell down to 1.6 in the U.S. in 1.7 in 2019. But then now the economy is pretty good, and we keep falling. So in the U.S., in times with worse economies, we have more babies, and in times with better economies, let me say the two are not correlated. Millennials and Generation Z like to say, well, it's so much less affordable today. The millennials are not poorer than we were, Generation X. They're not poorer than the baby boomers, and the same with Generation Z. In fact, I had a telling Hungarian analogy when my cab driver, Peter, he was talking about how rough it was growing up poor with one sibling in Budapest, and then he said he doesn't have kids because he can't afford it, but also he's blessed to have so much more than his parents ever had. So affordability, and I don't like to say, oh, you guys, again, this man's a cab driver. He's middle class. He's working class. But certainly there's evidence of affordability not having fallen off a cliff for the millennials and Generation X. An economist, Jeremy Horpadal, I cite in the book, says that the number of weeks it takes the median man to pay for 1 year of raising a child has actually gone down since 2010. So by that measure, in the U.S., it's become more affordable to raise children while the birth rate has collapsed. But economics does matter. First of all, Patrick and I have something of a circuit in Washington, D.C. of talking about why the child tax credit needs to be fixed. It was great that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made this $2,000 a child tax credit. It wasn't indexed for inflation. Some of you may have heard we had a little bit of inflation in the last couple of years, so it's lost something like 15 to 20% of its value. And it replaced another benefit, which was the personal and dependent exemption. So we're getting close to the point where this will end up being a reduction in family benefits. And without the child tax credit, which some people in the Republican Party advocate, it would actually be more taxes on a family of 5 with 2 kids, 3 kids, 2 parents. If they're making $125,000, slightly above the family average in the U.S., they would be paying more in taxes than just a household of 5 dudes all hanging out, Uber drivers, baristas. We would have an anti-family tax policy without the child tax credit, and so that's an economic part that matters. But the 2 main ways in which economics matters for being family-friendly, one, and this I heard from every single person I spoke to in Hungary, and I firmly believe it's true everywhere, is just stability. And do you believe that the future, that if you have a job, even if it doesn't pay great, that it will be there in the future? Do you believe that you'll have massive inflation? And so that is, I think, what governments need to talk about. In the U.S., we currently have tariffs that appear on a Monday and disappear on a Wednesday. That's not economic stability. And the people I spoke to in Hungary worried about the same thing. The main way in which I think cost does drive down the birth rate is the cost of owning a home. Now, that's gone up dramatically in the U.S. with mortgage rates and home prices in the last 4 years. This is an inadequate explanation for the baby bust because for us, remember, it started in 2008. But that is a thing. Subsidizing demand, giving money to home buyers, we tried that. It created a financial crisis that rippled over here. I think some of Hungary's tax policies might do that too. Kamala Harris's best answer during the whole campaign when she was asked, why do young people don't have kids, how can you make it more affordable? She basically said, we need more homes. We need to increase the supply. That, I believe, is part of the most important part of a family-friendly economy is more homes. But on that note, the second aspect, outside of economics, is infrastructure. Again, what this man Gabor called environment, he lived across the street from a park. There's, can your children get places without being driven around? Chapter 3 of my book is titled, If you want fecundity in the sheets, you need walkability in the streets. That's my favorite chapter title. And mostly, what is that about? Generation X and the older, we were told on a summer afternoon or a Saturday afternoon, head out the door, come back when the street lights turn on. Sometimes the door locked behind us. But that ability to wander the neighborhood, well, crime is a huge deterrent to that. The lack of sidewalks is a very simple problem that we have in my neighborhood. People who talk about being too car dependent and the cars going too fast in America tend to be on the left, but I'm going to talk about it because my children need to be able to walk without mom or dad taking them there and without being driven everywhere. So much of America lives in what I call car hell. And you have to buckle them into these car seats. And J.D. Vance cited a study titled Car Seats as Contraception. And it has driven down the birth rate, in part because it's so unpleasant. I mean, we get minivans and you can step in there, but otherwise you're craning your back, buckling in the kid. There's that one buckle that's underneath them, so you have to reach your hand into this like slurry of like chewed up crackers and baby spit. And you have to do that multiple times a day. Yeah, you're going to stay at home. And so liberating us from that would be key. In Israel, and a lot of it, in Israel, when I visited the Golan Heights a few years ago, a grandparent I talked to said, you have a lot of freedom here in the Golan Heights. And then another man who was maybe he wasn't as good as his English, or maybe he was just a little more honest, the way he put it, he says, you don't even have to take care of your children here. This is actually a big part of what parents need. For parental stress, for relieving childhood anxiety, kids need to be unsupervised. So an infrastructure, whether it's crime, walkability, or frankly, norms. And that's step 3, which is, what are the norms of a society? Where I used to live in Montgomery County, Maryland, it was not tolerated to let your kids walk to the park. I would do things that my wife said, oh, I can't believe you let them do that. I said, they're not going to get kidnapped. She said, I'm not afraid of kidnappers. I'm afraid of Child Protective Services. But Child Protective Services would only arrest, and they did arrest people in our county for letting their kids go to the playground alone, but because other people aren't doing it. And in fact, some parents say, I would like to let my kids run free, but nobody else is doing it, so they'd be running alone. And that would make it less safe and less fun. But on norms, I also just mean, is it normal? Is it normal to have kids? Is it normal to have a lot of kids? Or is it merely just a lifestyle choice? And this was addressed in the earlier panel. And of course, it needs to be a choice. But is it the natural choice that some people will opt out of? Or is it like choosing what color your car is going to be, entirely individualistic? And I think something downstream from the sexual revolution, from the birth control pill, is it is just a choice. And it is just one of many choices, then society doesn't have an obligation to support you in that. We have all sorts of subsidies in the U.S. for electric cars. I don't think I should be subsidizing Patrick's decision to own a Tesla. By the way, that story used to have a different political valence when you mentioned Tesla just a few weeks ago. But I do think that having kids, and not just having kids, but having them everywhere, bringing them to a conference, bringing them to a restaurant, it is actually part of the obligation of society to support it. And so we have to grow beyond the idea that it's simply a choice. In Tel Aviv, I met a man who I said, hey, I'm here writing about family, about birth rate. And he said, oh, it's way too high here in Israel. I said, what do you mean? And he pointed sort of in the direction of Jerusalem. And he said, the religious people over there, they have way too many kids. And he was going on about how bad this was while he was kicking a soccer ball back and forth with his 4-year-old. And in the middle of his rant against big families, his wife walked up and handed over their 1-year-old baby. And I thought, what a country. The antenatal people here have 2 kids. And it's the norm there. You show up at a restaurant, and a nicer restaurant, there are people with children there. And certain subcultures, it is normal to have a number of kids. I am blessed to send my children to Catholic schools where it is expected that that everybody's going to be married, and we have families, lots of families with 1, and we have families with 12. We have somebody. It starts in 3rd grade, and 4th graders sometimes will introduce, say, this 3rd grader. This is Harvey, my uncle. So things like that happen. Also, the parking lot is extra full because people drive these massive, basically they look like hotel shuttles, but we call it, they're just a family van, we call them the Catholic assault vehicle. So that is, and once that's normal, you can see the older family. You can see, okay, wait a second, it is possible to do this. Wait, when they get older, they can help take care of the younger one, especially if it's a girl, and all of that. But then I remember talking to a man in Jerusalem, and he had 3 children under the age of 4. He said, you want to have 9 kids? And he said, part of it is the message I send to the seculars. They look at me, they say, that man's crazy. He has 9 kids. I'm going to have only 3. What's normal matters. Finally, though, on a deeper level, what's family-friendly is a philosophy or even an anthropology. One of the women I met in this city told me she doesn't plan on getting married, and she thinks that marriage is bad for people. And I said, well, I'm kind of a selfish person, and marriage and parenthood are the first time that I started sacrificing for other people. And she said, this is exactly the problem. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, you are making coffee for your wife in the morning instead of making something brilliant for yourself. She thought that her anthropology was one, some people call it expressive individualism, but it's a anthropology, a belief that as these autonomous individuals, our job is to just fully realize ourselves, and that any connection with other people should be conditional and should be transactional. And that anthropology is the biggest headwind I think we're facing. And it's a sad anthropology. It's a lonely anthropology. And so I call it civilizational sadness. And so when you ask young people and they don't say money, or they don't say I'm selfish, and they say, well, it would destroy the climate. I think that talk about the environment and the climate change, that's a cover story. Because what does it mean when they say, we are destroying, a baby would destroy the climate? It means I'm destroying the climate. It means I'm not good. And that belief in the lack of our goodness, I think, is one of the key causes to this. So finally, I'll just note, when did we reverse this fertility decline? Well, in the United States, we had a very big baby boom. And it wasn't just a makeup for the babies that didn't happen during the war. The baby boom was massive. The age at first marriage went down to 21. The birth rate went up much higher than it had been in decades. And it lasted for a while. And why did it happen? There are all sorts of reasons. Homes were more available, et cetera. But I think there was a deeper one. Our men got off the boat and said, we just saved the world from 2 evil empires. And our women were waiting there, and they said, we just kept the economy going for 4 years. So they smooched on the pier, went to the chapel, got married, had a bunch of babies, because they knew more than ever since or ever before that we were, in fact, good. And so that is one of the core elements of being family-friendly, is convincing people, yes, we are fallen, but we are good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your interventions. They were amazing. And now we have about roughly 15 to 20 minutes to have a quick but lively discussion about the topics that you have just mentioned. Tim, so the title of your book is Family Unfriendly, but the subtitle is How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. And the reason why I found it very precisely describing like my generation, as you mentioned, Gen Z, is because I don't only feel that we are trying to make it look hard, we are trying to convince ourselves, not me, I have a 15-month-old at home, but we are trying to convince ourselves that we are actually doing good to ourselves, to society, climate, by not having children. So what's the secret sauce for transforming the mindset of this generation? And I know that there's no simple answer to that, but maybe we can start talking about this.
Well, I mean, one aspect of it, I think, on the male side is that we have this kind of a feminization of a lot of institutions of culture in the U.S. School in the U.S. is made for girls. Middle school, elementary school, high school. And that's why college, two-thirds of the college graduates nowadays are women. And then family, I was at a hearing on Capitol Hill, and somebody said, what can we do to make sure that men take up an equitable role in caregiving? And my first thought was, stop talking that way. We need talk about being a dad. Being a dad is awesome. My 7-year-old took a brilliant picture the other day, me playing basketball against her older brother, and he's taking the shot, and I just jump up and I swat the ball out of the air, absolutely stuffed him. That boy was 8 years old at the time. And so, like, dunking on an 8-year-old is not something my wife is interested in, but it's an awesome part of being a dad. And so then the broader thing is painting these stories is culturally, and again, it's got to be a cultural move. Government policy isn't going to be able to do this very well, but painting these stories of marriage and parenthood as heroic undertakings. And for women, I think a lot of it has to, my wife stays at home with the kids, and even in conservative circles, people ask her what she does, and she says, I raised 6 kids, and the conversation ends and they walk away. But and then women who go to top-tier colleges, when they say, oh yeah, I want to get married and have kids, you're wasting your money going to college, as if an education is only for building for a career. There is no quick, easy way to do it, but that's what we have to do, is change the understanding of motherhood, fatherhood, and marriage in the culture.
And maybe we need to start at early childhood. Brad, I think it's really important what you have highlighted, that we need to guard childhood as childhood, because we can only talk about responsible adults raising children if we have responsible adults. But for that, we need them to have a safe childhood where they have a father figure, a mother figure. The topics that you've mentioned, I think, shook all of us to our cores, like the data and the numbers you have presented. And also, just to make it worse, me as a Gen Z who scrolls TikTok sometimes, it's so shocking to see what is being presented to us, just seeing girls doing challenges like sleeping with 1,000 men. It's been quite a big sensation in the past few weeks that I think a girl who was my age, 20-something, made it a challenge for herself to sleep with 1,000 men in 24 hours. And that's what's being presented to us, to our generation. It's really hard to stay connected to reality and to the traditional values when those are the things that are in front of our eyes 24/7. So what do you think besides legislation? Because I know that it's not just the responsibility of the state or the family, but maybe it's both, maybe it's neither. What's your take on that? How can we maybe prevent this from happening?
Yeah, sure. So I think the two things to say there. I mean, one, this piggybacks off of something Tim said, which is, I want to make sure when we're talking about protecting childhood that we don't fall into a kind of safetyism, that it's actually children need space to run outside and play and fall down and bruise their knee or maybe even break a bone and go to the ER. And these things that were normal parts of childhood that now parents from like 1990 onward were so afraid of anything bad happening to their kid in the physical world that they protected their children and brought them inside and then gave them a piece of technology and said, oh, nothing bad could happen, And so we took them out of the dangers of the physical world and then put them into, in some cases, much worse dangers of the digital world. And so Jonathan Haidt's book, Pushing Back on This, is really key that we need to say no to certain things, but we also need to be able to say yes to certain things. We need to replace one vision of childhood with another vision of childhood. And that letting kids play has to be part of the solution, because you can't just lecture parents, why'd you give your 3-year-old a tablet, why'd you give your 10-year-old a smartphone? Because parenting is hard work, and with the kids throwing a tantrum, it used to be the solution was you send them outside to play, and if it's no longer culturally okay to send them outside to play, then you are going to be tempted to just put them in front of a screen. So those things have to go together, and I think that's part of that is policies, but a lot of that is just changing cultural norms and expectations. I'd say on, another thing I want to highlight that you were pointing out with TikTok is I think we need to, and this ties in with a number of things that we've been talking about here, is the importance of exemplars in society. When we look around and we say, what are other people doing? And then that's a permission structure for what I should be doing. And this is more the case for kids than it's the case for us as adults. We look for exemplars, but kids are always like, what am I supposed to be when I grow up, right? And I don't think we realize, like a lot of the conversation around the harms of social media and such has been like what it's doing to the kids now, the anxiety issues and so on. But I'm also concerned about what is it doing to them in terms of them saying, what do I want to be when I grow up? Well, what have I seen successful adults? The successful adults I've seen are, the Instagram influencer, who's raking in $100,000 a month, peddling beauty products. That's what I want to be when I grow up. And is that what we want? Is that what most parents want their kids to be when they grow up? I don't think so. So we need to recognize how, the technology issue is also what kind of exemplars are we putting in front of our children. And in terms of responding to that, it has to be, I think we have to use policy to create some reasonable barriers, like let's make the internet age-gated in the same way that the physical world is. But beyond that is going to be creating communities that are willing to kind of adopt these norms together. Because again, it's very often a case where every parent looks around and says, well, this is what I would like to do, but I don't want to be the one weirdo. Or I might be willing to be the weirdo, but my teenager doesn't want to be the one weirdo who's disconnected from all her friends. And so it's a community problem that can only be solved by communities acting together. And I think churches have a key role to play in spearheading that.
So we need the parents on the individual level, we need the communities. But here comes the question of the state. And Fiona, I wanted to ask you about this because you mentioned that you received criticism for being a nanny state, for trying to support those who want to have children throughout the family hub that you've created. And this is a criticism that here in Hungary the government usually gets, that maybe they are going to put those who don't have children to a disadvantage against those who want to have children. And the thing is that we don't want to do that. We just don't want those who have children to be disadvantaged, maybe from a financial point of view. So where do you think the state's responsibility lies when it comes to helping families without being a nanny state?
That's a good question. I think that politicians can have an enormous influence on culture if they're bold enough to make the decisions like the ones we're hearing about in Hungary, and just take that flak. Because if you don't take that flak that you're telling people how to live their lives, then it's the children who are suffering. It's not us. The children who are paying the price because they're losing their life chances, and the poorest pay it the most. They're the ones who find it most difficult to be resilient when they come out of a family where there haven't been working relationships, where their education has suffered, where their job prospects have suffered. And so we have to be honest with ourselves and say, we will let them down if we don't. And I can say that, whilst I talked about one of the policies in our manifesto that appears now to be coming good, and I'm pleased that even the current socialist government in our country is supporting family hubs. There were many others that didn't, and I'm very sad about that. And one of them, for example, is we need to tell our children now, because many have no role models from not just one, but 2, even 3 generations of what marriage is all about, what family is all about, what a happy, functioning home is all about. And we suggested in our manifesto, for example, you might think it's crude, but in the UK, you have to pay to register to get married. And the crude suggestion we made was offer to every young couple who comes, who's having to pay that fee, to waive that fee if they will sit and just attend a short course on what marriage means. Okay. Many of them may well learn so much. Some of them will even decide not to get married. We know that. We know that. And that's success, isn't it? Because isn't it better that they decide before the marriage than after? Sadly, that policy wasn't taken up, nor in practice has been the suggestion that we made that actually within our explicit sex education classes, which grieve me even to think about, there's been so little about what relationships are all about. And the word marriage, to actually have the word marriage within them, and for it to be something that husbands and wives can come in, can talk in the class about, that church representatives can come in and talk about, would be such an eye-opener to many of the children in those classes. And I think we as politicians have got to be bold and brave and say, we have got to stop making those children pay the price for our failures to do these things.
I just wanted to hop on that. Completely second everything that you said. Obviously, we've seen in the U.S. over the last, 5 months or so. The vibe shift that's taken place, just having a politician who's taken office and said the truth about things like gender ideology and critical race theory and some of these other things. It's, for those of you who have not been to the U.S. since last November, it's really, a breath of fresh air. It would be wonderful to have that kind of enthusiasm applied to some of the questions, family formation, marriage, that sort of thing, and maybe, that will come down the pike. But we also have to run the risk of knowing what battles to pick, right? And I think that's where sometimes some of our friends in the pro-family, pro-natalist movement, I mentioned some, veer into territory of, maybe playing footsie with unsavory folks online or having sort of excessively rigid views about, well, women are the ones who should stay home until the kids are out of the house and they shouldn't be working. These type of things, I think, actually turn off the people we were trying to attract. And when we're trying to, explain that the people who are the most vulnerable are the ones who stand to benefit the most from strong marriages and healthy families, if we're too prescriptive about what that needs to look like, or what that labor force participation model needs to look like, I think that's not as helpful when we're just being more egalitarian. We're going to have a child benefit that's big, right? The USDA, the federal government, says that the average family in the U.S. spends about $300,000 over the course of a child's life. It's about $16,000 a year. I don't think we're going to pass a child tax credit that's anywhere close to that big. So we're not going to achieve total parity between the child having and the childless, but we can at least move the direction, the ball forward in that direction. And I think it's harder to do that when we are starting to get into unsavory elements.
We have 5 minutes, so we have to be very quick about this. What I'm going to ask you to do is to have one very short sentence that has to be a very provocative and eye-opening and maybe a hard pill to swallow for those who don't know why it's important to raise kids who are mentally healthy, raise them in a family that's based in a marriage, and why family needs to be the basis of the society if we want flourishing societies. And I really want you to be very tough about this, because that's, I think, the only way how it can be very eye-opening and something that our audience can take with themselves. But before that, let me ask you this. My view, my experience when I talk about Hungarian family policy to anyone who's not from Hungary is that they find it shocking because it makes so much sense. So for me, my experience is that since it's merely based on common sense and rationality, that makes it hard to swallow sometimes, because it's not something that we invented or something that's so uniquely Hungarian that none of the other nations could do the same. It's because it's merely based on an everyday life of a family, of a man, of a woman, of a child. So do you think that there will be a time when nations, countries will just have this aha moment of realizing, like, maybe it's not even that hard to do that in any other country, in Europe or transatlantic?
Well, I don't think the case is clear that the Hungarian family policy has accomplished the goal of a long-term increase in the birth rate. I mean, the total fertility rate fell to 1.38 last year, and so there's evidence that, as we were saying earlier, there's a broader cultural problem. Economics is one aspect of it. And so if Hungary sees its birth rate drop like the rest of Europe, it will be very hard to argue that these policies need to be emulated across the continent.
Okay, so provocative sentence. I would say when you give your child a smartphone, you are inviting potentially every other person in the world into the task of helping raise your child. And you are telling the child that they are the master of their own destiny, called to create their own identity. So I think conservatives need to think a lot more about the relationship of technology and family.
Thank you. That's exactly the kind of sentence I was looking for.
It was a long one, many semicolons.
I've got 2 points. First, I think there may just be beginning an aha moment in the UK, because our problems are so wide-ranging. And it's actually about the other end of life. It's about the fact that we have an aging population and families are not caring for our people who are aging, and the price that the society, the taxpayer, the treasurer is having to pay is going to be completely unsustainable. So that's something, it's a real wake-up call, and we're going to have to look at how we can better care for our older generation than what happens at the moment, which is so many of them are put into care. The thought I had about the provoking question was actually not unlinked with that. I always say the most important job I had in the world, I'm not sure I did it to the best, was being a mom. But the second job I have, and I still have, is being a local solicitor, a local lawyer. And so one of the things that we do deal with is a lot of death, organising and helping families organise an estate when someone has died. And I think the provoking question I have, because it will come to us all, is when you get to that point at the end of your life, what will you look back and think you've done that was valuable? And I reckon you will reflect a lot more on your relationships than many other issues in your life.
I'm going to let Tim have the last word because I know it'll be better than mine. I think, and I don't know if this even counts as a provocative statement in Hungary, but it does in the U.S., so I'll claim it. I think, Tim mentioned during the 2024 campaign, there were gestures towards some of this from both sides of the aisle, and we hear this from even some of our progressive friends. Well, we should support more kids if that's what people want to do. We want to make it easier for people to have the number of kids they say they want to have, and public community close the gap between desired fertility and actualized fertility. And that's fine, but there's two ways of closing the gap. One is increasing achieved fertility, one is decreasing desired fertility, and what we're seeing is that desired fertility is actually going down over time. So my provocative statement to folks in the U.S. is hinging prenatal policy on individual desire alone is going to be a pretty hollow vision for the future. It needs to be based on the intrinsic good of family life and having babies born to a two-parent household. I think that's something that Hungary does well. I don't see that in the more libertarian political culture that we live
in. One change that would be good for children, good for parents, and good for community would be more stay-at-home moms. Dads too, but in fact, the United States at least needs to elevate this calling, make sure people understand it's a highest calling, and say that actually the woman or dad, but it will be mostly women who choose to have their full-time job caring for the children and supporting the family have chosen the better part.
I'm going to go home and tell that to my mom, because now she's going to have her high school class reunion. I think it's the 35th, maybe. And then she said that she's not sure she's going to go. And I was like, Mom, why? It's going to be great to see all these people. And she was like, well, I think they're all going to come up with these titles that they have. And what am I going to say? And I was like, that you are our mom. So that's exactly the message that I'm going to take home and tell her that she should go to that reunion. I'm going to let all of you enjoy your lunch, and I wanted to thank my amazing panelists for having, in my completely unbiased opinion, the best panel for today. So thank you.